Picture this. The flame dies in the howling darkness of the North Sea storm. Imagine a lighthouse beacon. The only thing standing between dozens of ships and the jagged rocks below suddenly goes dark. The wind screams through the stone tower. Rain lashes against the narrow windows, and somewhere in the black water beyond, you can hear the desperate horn calls of vessels that are now sailing blind towards certain death. In this story, you have minutes, maybe less, to relight the beacon before ships full of innocent people are dashed against the cliffs. Welcome to our tale of the most terrifying job in medieval Europe. In this fictional narrative, you become a lighthouse keeper, and tonight, failure means mass murder. Picture this fictional scenario. The year is 1347, and in our story, you find yourself standing on the windswept coast of Cornwall, England, staring up at the imposing stone tower that will become both home and prison for the foreseeable future. The beacon of St. Michael's Point rises 60 feet from the rocky promontory, its thick walls built to withstand the violent storms that regularly batter this stretch of coastline. In this tale, you've taken this position not out of any romantic notion about solitary life by the sea, but out of pure desperation. The Black Death has been ravaging Europe for months now, killing merchants, farmers, craftsmen, anyone who works closely with other people. The lighthouse keeper's job, isolated and dangerous as it is, offers something precious in these plague years: distance from the disease that's consuming the civilized world. The previous keeper, a grizzled man named Edmund Blackwater, disappeared 3 weeks ago during a particularly violent storm. His body was never found, though pieces of his clothing washed up on the rocks below the lighthouse. The local lord, desperate to keep the beacon operational for the merchant vessels that bring him revenue, offered the position to anyone brave or foolish enough to accept it. The pay is surprisingly good: 12 silver pieces per month, plus food deliveries, twice weekly. But the isolation is complete. The nearest village is 5 miles inland, connected to the lighthouse only by a treacherous path that becomes impassable during storms. For weeks at a time, you'll be entirely alone with nothing but the sea, the wind, and the crushing responsibility of keeping ships from foundering on the rocks below. Brother Marcus, the Benedictine monk who serves as the Lord's representative, leads our fictional protagonist up the narrow spiral staircase that winds through the interior of the tower. The stone steps are worn smooth by decades of use, and the walls weep moisture that never seems to dry. The smell is distinctive: salt, air, burning oil, and something else. Something organic and unpleasant that you can't quite identify in this imaginary scenario. The beacon chamber is at the top, Brother Marcus explained as you climb in this story, his voice echoing in the narrow space. The flame must never be allowed to die completely. Even during the day, a small pilot light burns continuously, and when darkness falls, you build it into a proper beacon that can be seen for miles at sea. The responsibility weighs on you immediately. Ships depend on this light for safe passage through the treacherous waters off Cornwall's coast. Without it, vessels carrying merchants, pilgrims, and ordinary travelers will run aground on the hidden rocks that lurk just beneath the surface. The lighthouse keeper doesn't just tend a fire. He holds the lives of countless strangers in his hands every single night. The beacon chamber itself is a circular room at the top of the tower, with windows facing in all directions to allow the light to be seen from any approach. The beacon apparatus is more sophisticated than you expected. A series of polished metal reflectors designed to amplify and direct the flame's light out to sea. The fuel is whale oil, stored in large ceramic containers that line the walls. The oil deliveries come every fortnight, Brother Marcus continues, weather permitting. If storms prevent the delivery boat from reaching you, you must ration carefully. The beacon cannot be allowed to fail, even if it means using the oil intended for cooking or heating. Already you can see the harsh arithmetic of lighthouse keeping in winter storms, when ships most need guidance. the supply boat may be unable to reach the lighthouse for weeks. During these periods, the keeper must choose between personal comfort and the sacred duty of maintaining the beacon. There's only one acceptable choice, and it's not a comfortable one. The living quarters occupy the middle levels of the tower. A small chamber contains a narrow bed, a wooden table, and a simple chair. Another room serves as a kitchen, with a small fireplace and shelves for storing food. The furnishings are sparse and functional. Everything that could be moved has been secured against the wind and storms that regularly assault the tower. Edmund Blackwater lived here for 7 years, Brother Marcus tells you, gesturing around the small living space. He was a reliable keeper, never missed a night of beacon duty, but the isolation, he trails off, studying your face. It affects different men differently. Some thrive in the solitude, others. He doesn't finish the sentence, but you understand the implication. The previous keeper's mysterious disappearance might not have been entirely accidental. Men who spend years alone with nothing but the sea and the wind sometimes make choices that seem perfectly rational to them, but horrifying to everyone else. The first night is revelation and terror. As darkness falls and you build up the beacon fire, the true nature of your responsibility becomes clear. From the beacon chamber, you can see lights on the horizon, ships making their way through the dangerous waters off the coast. Each light represents dozens of lives that depend on your vigilance and competence. The wind never stops. It howls around the tower with varying intensity, sometimes dropping to a moan, sometimes rising to a shriek that makes the stone walls vibrate. The sound penetrates everything, your thoughts, your dreams, your attempts at prayer. After just one night, you understand why lighthouse keepers develop a particular kind of madness. The constant noise would drive anyone to distraction, but worse than the wind is the responsibility. Every few hours throughout the night, you must climb the spiral staircase to check the beacon, add fuel, if necessary, and ensure that the light remains visible from all directions. The stairs are treacherous in the dark, worn smooth and slick with moisture. A single misstep could send you tumbling to your death, leaving the beacon untended and ships to find their own doom on the rocks. Sleep becomes a luxury rationed in small portions. You learn to nap for an hour or two between beacon checks, never allowing yourself to fall into deep sleep that might prevent you from waking when the flame needs attention. The constant vigilance is exhausting in ways you never anticipated. Physical labor you understand, but this mental strain of unending responsibility wears at your sanity in subtle but persistent ways. Your first week as a lighthouse keeper teaches you that the job involves far more than simply maintaining a fire. The beacon apparatus requires constant maintenance, cleaning the reflectors, trimming wicks, adjusting the flame for maximum visibility. The tower itself needs regular repairs, as the salt air and constant moisture eat away at everything made of metal or wood. The most challenging aspect is learning to read the weather. Ships approach the lighthouse from different directions depending on wind conditions, and experienced keepers learn to anticipate which routes will be most heavily traveled on any given night. During storm conditions, the beacon must be made as bright as possible, but this consumes oil at an unsustainable rate. The keeper must balance maximum visibility against finite resources. Brother Marcus returns after 3 days to check on your progress, and you're grateful for even this brief human contact. The isolation has already begun to affect you in ways you didn't expect. You find yourself talking aloud to no one, narrating your activities as if someone else were present. The sound of your own voice becomes reassuring in the constant noise of wind and waves. The hardest part for new keepers, Brother Marcus observes as he examines your beacon maintenance, is learning to trust your own judgment. You'll see things that aren't there. Ships in distress, signals from shore, lights that seem to be approaching but never arrive. The mind creates company when it has none. Already you've experienced some of this. Twice during your first week, You were convinced you saw distress signals from ships offshore, only to discover that the lights were reflections of your own beacon off the waves or clouds. The isolation plays tricks on perception that can lead to dangerous mistakes in beacon management. Edmund used to report phantom ships regularly during his final months. Brother Marcus continues. Vessels that he swore were in distress, calling for help that never came. We thought he was losing his mind, but now we wonder if he was seeing something else entirely. The monk's words chill you more than the constant cold wind. The idea that the previous keeper might have been experiencing supernatural phenomena adds a new dimension to the terrors of lighthouse duty. You're already struggling with the psychological pressure of isolation and responsibility. The possibility that the job might involve genuine supernatural hazards is almost too much to contemplate. The food deliveries arrive every 3 days, weather permitting, brought by a local fisherman named Tom Corvey, who seems immune to the treacherous waters around the lighthouse. Corvey is a taciturn man who rarely speaks beyond the practical necessities of unloading supplies, but his visits provide crucial human contact that helps maintain your sanity. Blackwater used to ask me to stay longer each time I came, Corvey mentions during his second delivery. Toward the end, he practically begged me not to leave. Said he was seeing things in the water, hearing voices in the wind. I thought it was just the isolation getting to him. The fisherman's account corroborates Brother Marcus's concerns about the previous keeper's mental state, but Corvey adds details that suggest something more than simple madness might have been involved. The night he disappeared, Corvey continues, I saw lights offshore that didn't belong to any ship I knew. Strange lights, moving in patterns that didn't make sense for normal navigation. When I came to deliver supplies the next morning, the lighthouse was dark and Blackwater was gone. These accounts of unusual phenomena offshore add a supernatural dimension to the already considerable terrors of lighthouse keeping. You're beginning to understand that the job involves more than maintaining a beacon and dealing with isolation. There are forces at work around the lighthouse that previous keepers have encountered, but never fully understood. Your first major storm arrives during your second week on duty. The weather builds gradually throughout the day. Increasing wind, darkening skies, and a drop in air pressure that you can feel in your bones. By evening, the sea is churning with whitecaps visible even in the fading light. The real terror begins after dark. With no moon and heavy cloud cover, the world beyond the beacon's light disappears entirely. The wind rises to a constant howl that shakes the tower, and rain lashes against the windows with enough force to crack the glass. The beacon flame gutters and threatens to die despite your best efforts to shield it from the wind. This is when you learn the true meaning of lighthouse terror. Ships caught in the storm will be fighting for their lives, desperately seeking the guidance of your beacon to avoid the rocks. But the same storm that endangers them makes it nearly impossible to maintain the light they need for salvation. Climbing the spiral staircase to check the beacon becomes a nightmare of its own. The tower sways in the wind. Not much, but enough to be noticeable and terrifying. The stone stairs are slick with moisture that's blown in through cracks and gaps in the walls. Each trip up the stairs feels like a potential death sentence, but the alternative, allowing the beacon to fail, means certain death for others. During the worst of the storm, you hear something that makes your blood freeze. The sound of a ship's horn, blowing repeatedly in the desperate pattern that signals distress. Somewhere out in the black water, a vessel is in trouble, probably blown off course and struggling to avoid the rocks. The horn calls become more frequent, more desperate, and you realize that lives depend on your ability to keep the beacon burning despite the impossible conditions. You spend the entire night making trips up the treacherous stairs, adding oil to the beacon, adjusting reflectors, and fighting to keep the flame bright enough to penetrate the storm. Your hands are raw from handling the rough metal implements. Your legs shake from exhaustion, and your eyes burn from smoke and oil fumes. But the alternative is unthinkable. Dawn reveals the aftermath of the night's terror. The sea is littered with debris, pieces of broken masts, torn sails, and wooden planks that tell the story of ships that didn't survive the storm. Some of the wreckage bears markings that suggest it came from merchant vessels, the kind that regularly pass through these waters, carrying goods and passengers between European ports. But there's no way to know whether your beacon made the difference between life and death for any particular ship. This uncertainty becomes part of the psychological burden of lighthouse keeping. You'll never know if your efforts saved lives or if people died because you failed to maintain the light properly. The responsibility is absolute, but the feedback is almost non-existent. By your third week as lighthouse keeper, the isolation has begun to reshape your mind in fundamental ways. Conversations become internal monologues conducted aloud. You find yourself assigning personalities to inanimate objects. The beacon apparatus becomes a temperamental companion that requires constant attention and flattery to function properly. The wind becomes a narrator, commenting on your activities, with moans and howls that seem almost conversational. Sleep patterns deteriorate as the constant vigilance required for beacon maintenance makes normal rest impossible. You learn to function on fragments of sleep stolen between beacon checks, never allowing yourself more than 2 hours of continuous rest. The chronic exhaustion creates a dreamlike state where the boundary between waking and sleeping becomes unclear. The food deliveries become the highlight of your existence, not just for the supplies they bring, but for the brief human contact with Tom Corvey. You find yourself preparing conversation topics days in advance, hoarding observations and thoughts to share during his brief visits. The fisherman begins to seem uncomfortable with your obvious desperation for human interaction. You're starting to get that look, Corvey observes during his delivery in your 4th week. Same look Blackwater had toward the end, like you're seeing too much and not enough at the same time. His words are unsettling because they're accurate. The constant scanning of the horizon for ships, the perpetual vigilance for signs of distress or danger, and the isolation from normal human society create a particular kind of awareness. You see everything that happens on the water around the lighthouse, but you have no way to interact with or influence most of what you observe. Ships pass regularly during good weather, and you begin to recognize certain vessels by their configuration of sails or the patterns of their lights. Some are merchant ships making regular runs between ports. Others are fishing vessels working the waters offshore. A few appear to be private yachts owned by wealthy individuals who can afford recreational sailing. But you can only observe. The lighthouse keeper's job is to provide guidance, not to participate in the maritime activities that surround him. You're like a ghost, watching the world of the living, present but unable to engage meaningfully with the life that flows past your isolated tower. The supernatural phenomena that Brother Marcus and Tom Corvey mentioned begin to manifest during your 5th week. It starts with lights offshore that don't correspond to any known shipping patterns. These lights appear during clear nights when normal navigation lights would be easily identifiable. They move in ways that suggest intelligent control, but follow patterns that make no sense for ordinary vessels. At first, you assume these are ships from distant ports whose routes and schedules you haven't learned yet. But the lights persist, night after night, always in roughly the same areas, always moving in the same inexplicable patterns. They seem to be concentrated around an area of particularly dangerous rocks about 2 miles southeast of the lighthouse. The lights are accompanied by sounds that can't be easily explained. On calm nights, when the wind dies down enough to allow other sounds to penetrate, you hear what seems to be voices calling from the direction of the mysterious lights. The voices are too distant to make out words, but the tone suggests distress or urgency. Your first instinct is to respond to these apparent distress calls, but experience has taught you caution. Several times during your tenure, you've mistaken ordinary sounds Wind through rock formations, waves against cliffs, even your own voice. Echoing off the tower walls, for human voices. The isolation plays tricks on perception that can lead to dangerous mistakes. But these voices are different. They occur regularly, always from the same direction, always with the same tone of urgency, and they're accompanied by the mysterious lights that move in patterns too deliberate to be accidental but too strange to be normal shipping traffic. You begin keeping a record of these phenomena, noting the times, weather conditions, and specific characteristics of the lights and sounds. The pattern that emerges is disturbing. The activity is most intense during the new moon, when natural light is at its minimum. It occurs primarily during the hours between midnight and dawn, and it's concentrated around the area where ships have historically foundered on hidden rocks. The records kept by previous lighthouse keepers, stored in a wooden chest in the living quarters, reveal that these phenomena are not new. Edmund Blackwater documented similar sightings throughout his 7 years of service. His predecessor, a man named William Thorne, also reported mysterious lights and voices offshore. But the records show a disturbing progression. Early entries describe the phenomena as curious but not particularly threatening. Later entries become increasingly agitated, expressing concern about the nature and purpose of the mysterious lights. The final entries, written shortly before each keeper's disappearance or death, suggest that the phenomena have become actively threatening. The lights have begun to approach the lighthouse, reads one of Blackwater's final entries. They seem to be testing my resolve, calling to me with voices that sound almost familiar. I fear they mean to lure me away from my duty, to extinguish the beacon that protects innocent travelers from their intentions. Another entry, written just days before Blackwater's disappearance, is even more ominous. I understand now what they are and what they want. The voices belong to those who died. On the rocks below, sailors whose ships foundered despite the lighthouse beacon. They seek to add others to their numbers, to darken the light that might save lives they couldn't save. I must resist their call, but their voices grow stronger each night. These records suggest that the supernatural phenomena around the lighthouse are not merely curious anomalies, but actively malevolent forces that have historically threatened the keeper's ability to maintain the beacon. The pattern of keeper disappearances and deaths takes on a more sinister significance when viewed in this context. Your 6th week brings the first real test of your competence as a lighthouse keeper. The autumn gale develops rapidly, catching several ships offshore without adequate warning. The storm strikes just after sunset, when visibility is already limited and ships are most dependent on lighthouse guidance for safe navigation. The wind builds to hurricane force within hours, creating seas that are terrifying even from the relative safety of the lighthouse tower. Waves crash against the rocky promontory with enough force to send spray up to the beacon chamber 60 feet above sea level. The tower itself groans under the assault, and you begin to understand why lighthouse construction requires such massive stone walls. But the real crisis develops when the beacon fuel supply runs low during the height of the storm. The violent weather has prevented Tom Corvée from making his scheduled delivery, and your rationing calculations prove inadequate for the extended period of maximum beacon intensity required during storm conditions. By midnight, you face the terrible choice that defines lighthouse keeping: personal survival versus duty to unknown mariners who depend on your beacon. The remaining oil could keep the beacon burning at full intensity for perhaps 4 more hours, or it could provide minimal heat and cooking fuel for several days until the storm passes and supplies can be delivered. The decision is agonizing but ultimately obvious. The beacon must be maintained regardless of personal cost. Ships caught in the storm will be fighting for their lives, and without lighthouse guidance, they'll almost certainly be driven onto the rocks. Your personal comfort, even your personal survival, cannot be weighed against the lives of innocent travelers. You begin burning everything combustible in the lighthouse to conserve oil for the beacon. Furniture, spare clothing, even some of the wooden record books from previous keepers. Feed the fires that keep you warm and provide light for moving around the tower. The irony is not lost on you. You're destroying the accumulated possessions and records of your predecessors. To maintain the light that defines your purpose, the storm continues for 3 days, during which you barely sleep and eat only what can be prepared without fuel. The beacon never fails, but maintaining it requires constant attention and increasingly desperate measures. When oil runs critically low, you begin burning whale fat that you find stored in the basement, creating a flame that burns less cleanly but provides adequate light for navigation. On the second night of the storm, you hear the sound you've been dreading. Ships' horns calling in distress patterns offshore. At least 2 vessels are in trouble, blown off course and struggling to avoid the rocks. The horn calls are desperate and frequent, indicating that the ships are in immediate danger. This is the moment when lighthouse keeping becomes a life-or-death responsibility rather than simply a job. Real people on real ships are fighting for their lives in the darkness below, and your beacon may be the only thing that stands between them and disaster. The weight of this responsibility is crushing, but it also clarifies your purpose completely. You spend the entire night tending the beacon with fanatical intensity, burning everything available to keep the light as bright as possible. Your hands bleed from handling rough metal tools in the cold. Your eyes water constantly from smoke and wind. Your legs shake from exhaustion as you make trip after trip up the spiral staircase to add fuel and adjust reflectors. But the beacon never fails. Throughout the worst of the storm, the light shines steadily from St. Michael's Point, providing guidance for ships struggling in the treacherous waters offshore. The horn calls gradually fade as vessels either find safe harbor or move beyond the range of hearing. But you have no way of knowing which. Dawn on the 3rd day reveals calm seas and clear skies, but also the debris of maritime disaster. The shoreline is littered with wreckage from ships that didn't survive the storm. Broken masts, torn canvas, and wooden planks bearing the names and markings of vessels you'll never be able to identify. But there's also evidence of survival. Tom Corvée arrives with emergency supplies and news that several ships rode out the storm in nearby harbors, their captains crediting the lighthouse beacon with guiding them to safety through the worst of the weather. Captain Morrison of the merchant vessel St. Catherine says your light saved 37 lives. Corvée reports as he unloads oil and food supplies. His ship was driven off course by the wind, and without the beacon, they would have hit the rocks for certain. The knowledge that your desperate efforts saved specific, identifiable lives provides validation that partially compensates for the physical and emotional cost of the experience, but it also reinforces the crushing weight of responsibility that defines lighthouse keeping every night. Unknown numbers of people depend on your vigilance and competence for their survival. The storm also reveals weaknesses in the lighthouse infrastructure that require immediate attention. Several window frames have been damaged by wind and flying debris, creating gaps that allow moisture to penetrate the beacon chamber. The spiral staircase shows stress fractures where the tower swaying during the storm exceeded the stone's flexibility. Most critically, the beacon apparatus itself has been damaged by the constant vibration and extreme conditions. Repairing these problems becomes your primary focus during the calm weather that follows the storm. But the work must be balanced against the constant requirement for beacon maintenance and the unpredictable schedule of supply deliveries. Every hour spent on repairs is an hour when the beacon might receive inadequate attention. The psychological aftermath of the storm is as challenging as the physical damage. Having proven that you can maintain the beacon under extreme conditions provides confidence, but it also establishes a precedent for self-sacrifice that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. Each future storm will require the same total. Commitment, the same willingness to risk personal survival for the sake of unknown strangers. Following the major storm, the supernatural phenomena around the lighthouse intensified dramatically. The mysterious lights offshore become more frequent and more active, and the voices that accompany them become distinctly threatening rather than merely curious or distressing. The pattern changes from the relatively passive observations documented by previous keepers to active interference with lighthouse operations. On several occasions, you discover that the beacon apparatus has been tampered with during the night. Reflectors moved, wicks trimmed incorrectly, oil containers mysteriously emptied. The changes are subtle but deliberate, designed to reduce the beacon's effectiveness without completely extinguishing it. These incidents occur on nights when the mysterious offshore lights are most active, suggesting a connection between the supernatural phenomena and the sabotage attempts. The implications are terrifying. Some intelligence is actively working to compromise the lighthouse's ability to guide ships safely through the dangerous waters. Your first direct encounter with whatever force is responsible for these incidents occurs during your 8th week as keeper. You wake in the middle of the night to find the beacon chamber filled with a pale, cold light that has no identifiable source. The normal beacon flame burns normally, but the entire room is illuminated by an ethereal glow that seems to emanate from the air itself. Standing near the beacon apparatus is a figure that appears to be human, but lacks the solid presence of a living person. The figure is dressed in the clothing of a sailor from an earlier era, perhaps 50 years past, and its face bears the pale, waterlogged appearance of someone who is drowned. When the figure turns toward you, its eyes hold an expression of desperate hunger that makes your blood freeze. "Join us," the figure whispers in a voice like wind through broken rigging. "The light has failed so many. Let it fail again. Come to the water where the responsibilities end and the peace begins." The encounter lasts only moments before the figure fades away, leaving you alone with the normal beacon flame and the sound of your own terrified breathing. But the experience provides crucial insight into the nature of the supernatural threat that has claimed previous lighthouse keepers. The voices offshore, the mysterious lights, the sabotage of beacon equipment, all are manifestations of the spirits of sailors who died in the waters around the lighthouse despite the beacon's guidance. Their presence suggests that the lighthouse, rather than being simply a tool for preventing maritime disasters, has become a focal point for the accumulated resentment and despair of those who died despite its protection. The psychological impact of this revelation is devastating. The job that you accepted as a refuge from the plague-ravaged world has become something far more dangerous than simple isolation and responsibility. You're not just maintaining a beacon. You're engaged in an ongoing supernatural conflict with the restless spirits of drowned sailors who seek to sabotage the very light that might save others from their fate. The sabotage attempts escalate following your direct encounter with the drowned sailor's spirit. Equipment failures become more frequent and more sophisticated, suggesting that the supernatural forces are learning your routines and vulnerabilities. Oil containers develop mysterious leaks. Wicks refuse to stay lit despite careful maintenance. Reflectors become inexplicably tarnished overnight, reducing their effectiveness. Most disturbing are the attempts to lure you away from the lighthouse during critical periods. On nights when ships are known to be approaching the dangerous waters, you hear voices calling your name from various directions around the lighthouse. The voices sound like people in distress, pleading for help with emergencies that require immediate attention. Your training and experience tell you that leaving the lighthouse unattended during navigation hours is the ultimate betrayal of lighthouse duty. But the voices are convincing, claiming to represent real people in genuine need of assistance. The psychological pressure to respond to apparent emergency calls creates constant internal conflict between duty and compassion. "Help me," calls a voice that seems to come from the rocks below the lighthouse. "I'm injured. Please come quickly. Every instinct developed during your brief time among civilized humans demands that you respond to calls for help. But your newer understanding of lighthouse responsibility requires that you ignore pleas that might be supernatural deceptions designed to compromise the beacon. The conflict is made worse by uncertainty about the nature of these voices. Some might genuinely be supernatural manifestations, but others could be real people in actual distress. The isolation and stress of lighthouse keeping make it difficult to distinguish between genuine emergencies and paranormal manipulation. You develop a system for responding to apparent distress calls without abandoning the beacon. During daylight hours, you investigate voices and unusual sights around the lighthouse base. During beacon hours, you maintain your position and document any phenomena for later investigation. This compromise allows you to maintain beacon reliability while still responding to possible genuine emergencies. The investigation reveals disturbing evidence around the lighthouse base. In caves and crevices among the rocks, you find personal effects that apparently belonged to previous lighthouse keepers. Clothing, books, tools, and other items that suggest the keepers visited these areas shortly before their disappearances. Most disturbing is the discovery of what appears to be Edmund Blackwater's journal, wedged into a crevice 20 feet below the lighthouse. The final entries describe his growing conviction that the supernatural forces around the lighthouse were gaining strength and becoming more aggressive in their attempts to extinguish the beacon. They speak with the voices of the living now. Reads one entry, "Not just the drowned, but people I know are safe in the village. They call to me with my mother's voice, my brother's voice, even my own voice echoing from the water." The deception becomes more sophisticated as their desperation grows. The final entry, apparently written on the night of Blackwater's disappearance, is almost illegible, but suggests that he believed the supernatural forces had found a way to physically manifest in the world. Around the lighthouse, they can touch things now, move them, break them. The boundary between their realm and ours grows thin when the beacon burns bright. I fear they mean to extinguish not just the light, but the keeper who tends it. Your 10th week brings the first unmistakable evidence that the supernatural forces around the lighthouse have developed the ability to affect the physical world directly. You wake one morning to find that the spiral staircase has been damaged during the night. Several stone steps have been loosened from their moorings, creating dangerous gaps that could cause serious injury or death. The damage is too extensive and too precisely targeted to be accidental. The loosened steps are located at critical points where a person climbing to tend the beacon would be most likely to lose their footing. The sabotage appears designed not just to inconvenience the lighthouse keeper, but to cause a fatal accident that would leave the beacon untended. Repairing the staircase becomes an urgent priority, but the work is dangerous and time-consuming. You must secure loose stones using improvised techniques and materials while maintaining the beacon schedule that cannot be compromised. The repairs require working alone in the confined space of the stairwell, making you vulnerable to further supernatural attack. During the repair work, you experience the sensation of being watched by invisible presences that seem to be evaluating your vulnerabilities and planning future sabotage attempts. The feeling is so intense that you find yourself speaking aloud to the unseen watchers, alternately pleading with them and threatening them. "I know you're there," you say to the empty stairwell as you work to reset a loosened stone. "I know what you want, but people's lives depend on this beacon. Whatever grievances you have against the lighthouse, innocent travelers don't deserve to die for them." The response comes as a sudden drop in temperature that makes your breath visible despite the physical exertion of the repair work. The cold is followed by the sound of footsteps on the stairs above you, measured, deliberate steps that suggest someone is climbing toward the beacon chamber. You abandon the repair work and race up the stairs, fearing that the supernatural forces have found a way to directly attack the beacon apparatus. But the beacon chamber is empty when you arrive. With no sign of disturbance except for a lingering cold that dissipates gradually as you check the equipment. The incident establishes a new pattern of supernatural harassment, designed to keep you in a constant state of vigilance and anxiety. The spirits seem to have learned that direct confrontation is less effective than a campaign of psychological warfare that gradually wears down your ability to function effectively as a lighthouse keeper. Strange sounds become a constant presence throughout the lighthouse. Footsteps in empty rooms, voices calling from areas where no one could possibly be present. The sound of doors opening and closing when all the doors are secured and locked. These auditory manifestations are designed to create the impression that the lighthouse is occupied by hostile presences that could strike at any moment. Visual phenomena join the auditory harassment. Shadows move independently of their sources. Lights appear in rooms where no flames are burning. Reflections in windows and metal surfaces show figures that aren't present in the rooms themselves. The cumulative effect is to make the lighthouse feel haunted and threatening rather than simply isolated. The sabotage attempts become more sophisticated and more dangerous. Oil containers develop pinhole leaks that drain fuel slowly enough to go unnoticed until critical shortages develop during beacon operations. Wicks are treated with substances that make them burn irregularly or produce excessive smoke. Reflectors are scratched or tarnished in patterns that reduce their effectiveness without being immediately obvious. Most alarming are the attempts to interfere with the beacon flame itself. On several occasions, you discover that the flame has been deliberately smothered during the night, requiring emergency relighting procedures that risk leaving ships without guidance during critical navigation periods. The extinguishing is done selectively. The pilot light remains burning, but the main beacon flame is eliminated. These incidents force you to remain awake throughout the night, checking the beacon every few minutes to ensure it hasn't been tampered with. The constant vigilance compounds the exhaustion that already makes lighthouse keeping physically and mentally demanding. Sleep becomes impossible, food becomes difficult to prepare and consume, and basic maintenance tasks become overwhelming challenges. The supernatural forces seem to understand that gradual psychological warfare is more effective than dramatic confrontations. Rather than presenting obvious supernatural threats that could be easily identified and potentially resisted, they create an atmosphere of constant low-level harassment that steadily erodes the keeper's ability to function effectively. They're wearing me down. You write in your own lighthouse log, following the pattern established by previous keepers. Not trying to kill me directly, but making it impossible to maintain the beacon properly. If I can't stay awake, if I can't trust the equipment, if I can't distinguish between real emergencies and supernatural deceptions, then I become a threat to the very ships I'm supposed to protect. The isolation compounds the psychological pressure. By preventing you from discussing these experiences with anyone who might provide perspective or assistance, Tom Carvey's supply deliveries become crucial opportunities to gauge your own sanity by observing someone else's reactions to the lighthouse. Environment. You look terrible, Corvey observes during his delivery in your 11th week. Worse than black water ever did. Something's got you spooked beyond normal lighthouse nerves when you attempt to describe the supernatural phenomena you've been experiencing. Corvey's reaction is skeptical but not dismissive. As someone who's worked these waters for decades, he's witnessed unexplained phenomena that have made him cautious about dismissing supernatural claims entirely. I've seen lights where there shouldn't be lights, he admits. Heard voices where there shouldn't be voices. But I've also seen what isolation does to men's minds. The question is whether you're seeing something real or something your mind is creating to cope with conditions that aren't natural for human beings. His perspective provides some comfort, but it doesn't resolve the fundamental question of whether the supernatural phenomena are objectively real or products of isolation-induced psychological breakdown. In practical terms, the distinction may not matter, whether the threats are supernatural or psychological. They're interfering with your ability to maintain the beacon effectively. Your 12th week as lighthouse keeper brings you to the edge of complete psychological collapse. The supernatural harassment has intensified to the point where normal functioning becomes nearly impossible. You're averaging less than 2 hours of sleep per night, eating irregularly due to constant interruptions, and spending so much time checking for sabotage that routine maintenance tasks are being neglected. The beacon itself begins to suffer from your declining effectiveness. The light burns less brightly due to inadequate maintenance of reflectors and wicks. Oil consumption becomes erratic as you struggle to balance conservation against the need for maximum illumination during critical navigation periods. Most dangerously, your response time to beacon emergencies begins to slow as exhaustion impairs your ability to move quickly up and down the spiral staircase. The supernatural forces seem to recognize that they're approaching success in their campaign to compromise the lighthouse's effectiveness. The harassment becomes more aggressive and more focused, concentrating on the beacon apparatus itself rather than general psychological warfare. You wake one morning to find that someone or something has rearranged the beacon chamber during the night. The oil containers have been moved to different positions. The reflectors have been turned away from the sea toward the interior of the lighthouse. Most alarmingly, the main beacon flame has been extinguished and relighted in a configuration that produces minimal light output. The rearrangement required intimate knowledge of the beacon apparatus and considerable physical strength to move the heavy oil containers. More disturbing, it was accomplished silently enough that you didn't wake despite your hypersensitive state of vigilance. Whatever forces are responsible have developed both the knowledge and the physical capability to completely sabotage the lighthouse operation. That night brings the most direct supernatural confrontation you've experienced since your first encounter with the drowned sailor spirit. As you climb the spiral staircase for a routine beacon check, you find the path blocked by multiple ghostly figures arranged across the steps, unlike your previous encounters with individual spirits. This appears to be an organized group effort to prevent you from reaching the beacon chamber. The figures are dressed as sailors from different historical periods, suggesting that they represent maritime casualties from decades or centuries of shipwrecks in the waters around the lighthouse. Their faces show the pale, waterlogged appearance of drowning victims. Their eyes burn with malevolent intelligence that makes it clear they're acting with purpose and coordination. "No more," speaks one of the figures, apparently serving as spokesman for the group. "No more false hopes. No more lights that promise safety but deliver death. Let the beacon die, and let the sea claim what it will without the pretense of salvation." The confrontation forces you to understand the supernatural force's motivation more clearly. They're not simply malevolent spirits seeking to cause harm for its own sake. They're the accumulated resentment of sailors who died despite the lighthouse. Beacon, victims of storms, hidden rocks, navigational errors, and other maritime disasters that the lighthouse couldn't prevent. From their perspective, the beacon represents false hope rather than genuine safety. Ships guided by the lighthouse still founder on hidden rocks, still fall victim to storms, still suffer from human error and mechanical failure. The beacon's presence may actually increase maritime casualties by encouraging ships to attempt dangerous passages in the belief that lighthouse guidance provides more protection than it actually can. "We died trusting in this light," continues the ghostly spokesman. "We believed it would guide us safely home, but the sea took us anyway, and our families were told that the lighthouse keeper did his duty." No one speaks for the dead when the living celebrate their false salvation. The encounter provides insight into the psychological and spiritual burden of lighthouse keeping that extends far beyond the practical responsibilities of beacon maintenance. Every ship that safely navigates past the lighthouse validates the keeper's efforts. But every ship that founders despite the beacon's guidance becomes a source of supernatural resentment that accumulates over time. The ghostly figures don't attempt to physically harm you, but they make it clear that they won't allow you to reach the beacon chamber without a fight. The confrontation becomes a test of will rather than physical strength, your determination to fulfill your duties as Lighthouse Keeper against their collective desire to end what they see as a deceptive and ultimately harmful institution. People are depending on this light tonight. You tell the assembled spirits. Ships are approaching these waters right now, and without the beacon, they'll hit the rocks for certain. Whatever grievances you have against the lighthouse, those people don't deserve to die for them. Neither did we, comes the response. But we died anyway, trusting in light that couldn't save us. Why should others be spared the disillusionment we experienced? The argument continues for what feels like hours, but is probably only minutes. The ghostly figures present their case for allowing the lighthouse to fail, that it provides false hope, that it encouraged dangerous risk-taking, that it serves the economic interests of merchants and ship owners rather than the welfare of common sailors who crew the vessels. Your counterargument focuses on the practical reality that shipping will continue regardless of lighthouse operations, and that some guidance is better than no guidance, even if it can't guarantee safety. The beacon may not prevent all maritime disasters, but it demonstrably reduces the number of ships that founder on the rocks immediately offshore from the lighthouse. The supernatural confrontation ends when you hear the sound of ships' horns. Offshore, real vessels approaching the dangerous waters around the lighthouse during the hours when beacon guidance is most critical. The ghostly figures seem to recognize that whatever philosophical arguments they might make against lighthouse operations, immediate practical concerns take precedence. The spirits fade away, allowing you to reach the beacon chamber and tend to the light that ships are depending on for safe passage. But their presence lingers as a constant reminder that lighthouse keeping involves moral complexities that extend far beyond the simple responsibility of maintaining a flame. Following the major supernatural confrontation, you begin to research the history of the lighthouse and the waters around it more systematically. The previous keeper's records provide some information, but you realize that understanding the supernatural phenomena requires knowledge that extends back further than the lighthouse's operational history. Tom Corvey, during his next supply delivery, provides crucial historical context that helps explain the intensity of supernatural activity around St. Michael's Point. The lighthouse, built 30 years ago, was constructed on a site that had already claimed hundreds of ships over the centuries of maritime traffic through these waters. Before the lighthouse was built, Corvey explains, this stretch of coast was known as the Devil's Teeth because of all the hidden rocks just below the surface. Ships would founder here regularly, especially during storms when they couldn't see the dangers until it was too late. The lighthouse construction was intended to reduce maritime casualties by providing navigation, guidance that would help ships avoid the underwater hazards. But the placement of the beacon on the same promontory, where so many ships had already been lost, created an ironic situation. The light designed to prevent maritime disasters was surrounded by the restless spirits of sailors who had died in previous disasters. The local fishermen tried to warn the builders about the area's history, Corvey continues. Said the spirits of drowned sailors wouldn't take kindly to a light that pretended to offer safety where none existed. But the authorities dismissed such concerns as superstitious nonsense. This historical context explains why the supernatural phenomena around the lighthouse are so hostile and so specifically focused on sabotaging beacon operations. The ghostly spirits aren't randomly malevolent entities, but the accumulated resentment of maritime casualties who died in these waters before lighthouse protection was available. From their perspective, the beacon represents not genuine safety, but cruel mockery, a light that arrives centuries too late to save them, installed by authorities who ignored the human cost of maritime commerce until economic interests made lighthouse construction profitable. The revelation helps you understand that the supernatural forces aren't simply trying to create more maritime disasters out of malicious intent. They're expressing a form of spiritual justice. If they couldn't have lighthouse protection when they needed it, why should future sailors receive protection that they were denied? This understanding doesn't make the supernatural harassment less dangerous, but it provides psychological context that helps you maintain empathy for the ghostly spirits while still resisting their attempts to compromise beacon operations. They're not evil entities, but tragic victims of historical circumstances that left them vulnerable to maritime hazards that modern travelers can avoid. The research also reveals that supernatural activity around the lighthouse follows predictable patterns connected to astronomical and meteorological conditions. The phenomena are most intense during new moon periods, when natural light is minimal, and lighthouse guidance is most critical for navigation. They increase during storm conditions, when maritime dangers are highest. They peak during the anniversary dates of major shipwrecks that occurred in the waters around the lighthouse. Understanding these patterns allows you to anticipate periods of heightened supernatural activity and prepare accordingly. During high-risk periods, you can take additional precautions to protect beacon equipment, remain more vigilant for sabotage attempts, and prepare psychological defenses against manipulation and deception. Most importantly, the research suggests that the supernatural phenomena are not unlimited in their power or persistence. Previous lighthouse keepers who disappeared or died were overcome during periods of maximum supernatural activity when they were already weakened by isolation, exhaustion, and psychological pressure. Edmund Blackwater's final journal entries indicate that he recognized the patterns of supernatural harassment but was unable to develop effective countermeasures before being overcome by the cumulative stress of constant vigilance. His disappearance occurred during a new moonstorm period when supernatural activity would have been at its peak intensity. The key to surviving as a lighthouse keeper, you write in your own journal, may be learning to function effectively during periods of maximum supernatural harassment while maintaining enough physical and mental reserves to outlast the peak intensity periods. The insight provides hope that lighthouse keeping is possible despite the supernatural hazards, but only for individuals who can develop the specific skills and psychological resilience required to cope with both the practical demands of beacon maintenance and the ongoing spiritual warfare that surrounds the position. Your understanding of the situation improves, but the fundamental challenges remain unchanged. Ships still depend on the beacon for safe passage. The supernatural forces still seek to compromise lighthouse operations. The responsibility for maintaining the light still falls entirely on your shoulders, regardless of the personal cost. As your 15th week as lighthouse keeper begins, you make a decision that previous keepers apparently never considered. Instead of simply resisting the supernatural forces around the lighthouse, you attempt to negotiate with them. The constant harassment has proven that they have legitimate grievances, and their intimate knowledge of maritime conditions suggests they might be valuable allies rather than simply obstacles to lighthouse operations. Your first attempt at communication occurs during a calm evening when supernatural activity is relatively low. Instead of simply tending the beacon and waiting for ghostly interference, you speak directly to the spirits you now are present around the lighthouse. I know you're here, you say aloud in the beacon chamber. I know what you want, and I understand why you want it, but we need to find a way to work together instead of fighting each other. The response comes as a gradual drop in temperature and the appearance of the familiar pale light that accompanies supernatural manifestations. 3 ghostly figures materialize in the beacon chamber. The same drowned sailor who first appeared to you, along with 2 others who wear the clothing of different historical periods. Why should we trust you? As the original spirit, you serve the same system that failed us, that treated our lives as acceptable losses in the pursuit of commercial profit. The lighthouse represents the same indifference to sailor welfare that killed us. The conversation that follows is unlike anything you've experienced during your time as lighthouse keeper. Instead of the desperate fear and resistance that characterized your previous supernatural encounters, you find yourself engaged in a rational discussion about the moral complexities of lighthouse operations. The spirits present their perspective. Lighthouse keepers are complicit in a system that provides minimal protection while encouraging maximum risk-taking. Ship owners and merchants use lighthouse beacons to justify sending vessels into dangerous waters during marginal conditions. The illusion of safety created by lighthouse guidance results in more maritime casualties than would occur if ships simply avoided dangerous areas entirely. We died because captains believed lighthouse guidance made risky passages safe, explains one spirit. Our families were told we died despite professional navigation assistance, but the truth is we died because lighthouse promises encouraged voyages that should never have been attempted. Your counterargument focuses on the practical reality that maritime commerce will continue regardless of lighthouse policy, and that some guidance is demonstrably better than no guidance, even if it can't eliminate all risks. The beacon may not prevent every maritime disaster, but it clearly reduces casualties in the immediate vicinity of the lighthouse. Ships pass through these waters every night, you explain. With or without the lighthouse, they're going to attempt these passages because commercial pressures demand it. The only question is whether they have guidance that might help them avoid the rocks, or whether they're navigating blind through waters that have already claimed hundreds of lives. The discussion continues throughout the night, with the ghostly spirits presenting evidence of lighthouse failures and you defending the practical value of navigation assistance. What emerges is a complex understanding of lighthouse operations as neither purely beneficial nor purely harmful, but as an imperfect tool that can reduce some risks while potentially creating others. The breakthrough comes when you propose a collaborative approach to lighthouse operations. Instead of simply maintaining a beacon that provides generic guidance to all passing ships, you suggest using the spirit's intimate knowledge of local maritime conditions to provide more targeted assistance to vessels that are actually in danger. You know these waters better than anyone. You tell the assembled spirits, you've experienced every type of maritime hazard that exists in this area. Instead of trying to extinguish the beacon, help me use it more effectively. Guide the ships that can be saved and warn away the ships that are beyond help. The proposal intrigues the spirits because it acknowledges their expertise while providing a constructive outlet for their desire to prevent maritime casualties. Instead of simply opposing lighthouse operations, they could become part of a more sophisticated guidance system that discriminates between ships that can benefit from beacon assistance and ships that require more extensive intervention. The negotiation results in an unprecedented agreement. The spirits will cease their sabotage of lighthouse equipment and harassment of lighthouse operations in exchange for your commitment to modify beacon operations according to their guidance. When ships are in genuine distress, you'll provide maximum illumination and attempt to signal coastal rescue services. When ships are engaged in reckless risk-taking that lighthouse guidance can't adequately address, you'll reduce beacon intensity to discourage dangerous passages. The arrangement requires developing communication protocols between you and the supernatural forces that allow for real-time coordination during maritime emergencies. The spirits can observe ship movements and weather conditions throughout the waters around the lighthouse, providing intelligence that no human observer could match. You control the beacon apparatus and can modify its operation according to their recommendations. We'll try this approach, agrees the lead spirit, but understand that our primary concern is preventing unnecessary maritime casualties. If lighthouse operations continue to encourage reckless voyages, we'll resume our opposition regardless of any agreements. The alliance fundamentally changes the nature of lighthouse keeping at St. Michael's point: instead of a solitary human struggling against hostile supernatural forces, you become part of a team that includes both living and dead members united by the common goal of maritime safety. The partnership with the ghostly spirits transforms the lighthouse operations in ways that exceed your most optimistic expectations. Their supernatural abilities to observe weather conditions, monitor ship movements, and detect maritime hazards provide intelligence that makes beacon operations far more effective than traditional lighthouse keeping. The spirits can observe ships approaching from distances that exceed normal human vision. They can assess weather conditions throughout the waters around the lighthouse. Not just at the lighthouse location, most valuable, they can evaluate the competence and decision-making of ship captains, identifying vessels whose crews are likely to make dangerous navigation mistakes, regardless of lighthouse guidance. Ship approaching from the northeast reports the lead spirit during your first collaborative operation. Three-masted merchant vessel, experienced crew, but overloaded cargo that makes them sit low in the water. Current weather conditions are manageable, but they're cutting too close to the rocks to take advantage of favorable winds. This level of detailed intelligence allows you to modify beacon operations to provide specific guidance rather than generic illumination. For ships with competent crews facing manageable conditions, standard beacon intensity provides adequate guidance. For ships in distress or commanded by inexperienced captains, maximum illumination combined with emergency signaling can alert coastal rescue services and guide vessels to the safest possible passages. Most importantly, the spirits can identify situations where lighthouse guidance is inadequate to prevent disaster, allowing you to refuse participation in voyages that are doomed regardless of beacon assistance. This selective approach prevents the lighthouse from becoming complicit in reckless risk-taking, while ensuring that vessels with genuine chances of survival receive maximum assistance. The first major test of the new partnership occurs during your 16th week, when a severe storm develops rapidly while several ships are transiting the waters around the lighthouse. The spirits provide advance warning of the storm's intensity and detailed assessments of each vessel's vulnerability to the weather conditions. 4 ships in the area, reports one spirit. The merchant vessel St. George has experienced crew and sound construction. They can ride out the storm if given proper guidance to the deepest water. The fishing boat Mary Catherine is overloaded and undermanned. They need to reach harbor immediately, or they'll founder. The private yacht Destiny is seaworthy, but commanded by an inexperienced captain who's likely to make dangerous decisions. The cargo ship Norfolk Queen is carrying a full load, but has suffered minor hull damage that makes storm conditions potentially catastrophic. This intelligence allows you to prioritize lighthouse assistance according to each vessel's specific needs and capabilities. Maximum beacon intensity guides the St. George to safe deep water where they can ride out the storm. Emergency signaling alerts coastal authorities to the Mary Catherine's need for immediate harbor assistance. Reduced beacon intensity combined with warning signals discourages the Destiny from attempting dangerous maneuvers in conditions beyond the captain's experience. Most critically, continuous emergency signaling summons rescue services for the Norfolk Queen before hull damage can result in catastrophic failure. The collaborative approach proves dramatically more effective than traditional lighthouse operations. All 4 ships survived the storm, with 3 reaching safe harbor and 1 riding out the weather in deep water until conditions improve. Without supernatural intelligence about each vessel's specific vulnerabilities, standard beacon operations might have guided some ships to safety, while inadvertently contributing to disasters for others. The success of the collaborative approach validates your decision to negotiate with the supernatural forces rather than simply opposing them. The spirit's grievances against traditional lighthouse operations prove to be based on legitimate concerns about the limitations and unintended consequences of generic beacon guidance. This is what lighthouse keeping should be: observes the lead spirit after the successful storm operations, not just providing light, but providing judgment. Not just guidance, but discrimination between ships that can be saved and situations that require different approaches. The partnership also transforms the psychological experience of Lighthouse, keeping from desperate isolation to collaborative teamwork. Instead of facing the crushing responsibility of maritime safety alone, you're part of a team whose supernatural members possess capabilities that complement your human skills and equipment access. Conversations with the spirits provide intellectual stimulation that compensates for the isolation from human society. Their historical perspective encompasses decades or centuries of maritime experience, providing insights into weather patterns, seasonal navigation hazards, and the evolution of ship design and seamanship practices. We've observed every type of maritime disaster that can occur in these waters, explains one spirit. Storm damage, navigation errors, mechanical failures, crew incompetence, cargo shifting, fire, collision. You name it, we've witnessed it. This experience allows us to predict disaster scenarios and recommend preventive measures that purely human observation couldn't anticipate. The knowledge base available through the supernatural partnership makes you a more effective lighthouse keeper than any previous occupant of the position. But it also creates new responsibilities and moral complexities that extend beyond traditional beacon maintenance. You're no longer simply maintaining a light that provides generic guidance to all passing ships. You're making judgment decisions about which vessels deserve assistance and which situations require alternative approaches. The discretionary power is both liberating and burdensome, requiring wisdom and judgment that exceed the normal qualifications. For lighthouse keeping positions, as your partnership with the spirits develops, you begin to encounter moral dilemmas that previous lighthouse keepers never faced. The ability to provide selective assistance to ships based on supernatural intelligence creates situations where you must choose between competing claims on your services. The most challenging situation occurs when two ships approach the lighthouse simultaneously during marginal weather conditions. The spirits inform you that both vessels are in potential danger, but the lighthouse's resources are insufficient to provide maximum assistance to both ships simultaneously. The merchant ship Apollo has experienced crew, but is carrying a dangerous cargo of raw materials that could explode if exposed to salt water. Reports one spirit. The passenger vessel Britannia has inexperienced officers, but is carrying 43 travelers, including women and children. Weather conditions are deteriorating, and both ships are approaching the dangerous waters around the lighthouse. The dilemma forces you to make life and death decisions about resource allocation that go far beyond the traditional lighthouse keeper's responsibility of maintaining a beacon for all vessels equally. Providing maximum guidance to the Apollo might prevent a cargo explosion that could kill the crew and create a navigation hazard for other ships. Prioritizing the Britannia might save the lives of innocent passengers who have no control over their ship's navigation decisions. What would you recommend? You ask the spirits. The Apollo's crew chose to transport dangerous cargo for increased profit. Responds the lead spirit. They're experienced sailors who understood the risks when they accepted the assignment. The Britannia's passengers are simply travelers who trusted their lives to transportation services they assumed were competently managed. The supernatural perspective prioritizes innocent passengers over professional sailors who voluntarily accepted hazardous assignments. But this creates its own moral problems. Should professional competence be penalized while inexperience is rewarded? Do commercial considerations automatically make the Apollo's crew less deserving of assistance than the Britannia's passengers? You ultimately decide to provide standard beacon guidance to both ships while using emergency signaling to alert coastal rescue services to the potential for multiple simultaneous maritime disasters. The approach distributes assistance equally, while acknowledging that both vessels face dangers beyond what lighthouse guidance alone can address. Both ships survive the incident, though the Apollo suffers minor damage that requires expensive repairs, and the Britannia experiences passenger injuries that result in legal challenges to the shipping company. The outcome validates your decision to avoid playing favorites while ensuring that external assistance was available for situations beyond the Lighthouse's capabilities. But the incident establishes a pattern of moral complexity that makes lighthouse keeping far more psychologically demanding than the simple beacon maintenance duties described in your original job assignment. Every night brings decisions about resource allocation, risk assessment, and the relative value of different human lives that no lighthouse keeper should be required to make. Traditional lighthouse keeping may have been inadequate. You write in your journal, but at least it was morally straightforward. Maintain the beacon, provide equal guidance to all ships, and let captains make their own navigation decisions. This new approach is more effective, but it requires making moral judgments that I'm not qualified to make. The spirits provide historical perspective that helps contextualize these moral dilemmas. Throughout maritime history, lighthouse keepers have been making similar decisions without acknowledging them explicitly. By providing generic guidance that works better for some ships than others, traditional lighthouse operations already involve implicit moral choices about which vessels receive effective assistance. Every lighthouse keeper who ever lived made choices about beacon intensity, fuel allocation, and emergency response that affected which ships survived and which ships didn't. Explains one spirit. The difference is that we're making these choices consciously and deliberately, instead of pretending they don't exist. The supernatural partnership forces recognition of moral complexities that have always existed in lighthouse operations, but were previously hidden behind the illusion of neutral. Beacon maintenance. Ships have always received unequal assistance from lighthouse guidance based on factors like weather conditions, equipment status, and keeper competence. The partnership simply makes these inequalities explicit and allows for more thoughtful decision-making about resource allocation. But conscious moral decision-making is psychologically exhausting in ways that simple beacon maintenance never was. The knowledge that your choices directly affect human survival creates pressure that compounds the already considerable stress of isolation and constant vigilance required for lighthouse operations. I sometimes think Edmund Blackwater was fortunate. You reflect during a conversation with the spirits. He faced supernatural harassment, but at least his moral responsibilities were clear. Maintain the beacon, resist the interference, protect the light. I have to decide which lives are worth saving and which risks are worth taking. The spirits acknowledge that their partnership has created psychological burdens that didn't exist under traditional lighthouse operations, but they argue that conscious moral decision-making is preferable to the unconscious moral abandonment that characterized previous lighthouse keeping approaches. We died because lighthouse keepers pretended. They weren't making moral choices, responds the lead spirit. They maintained generic beacons that provided inadequate guidance to ships in genuine distress while encouraging reckless voyages by captains who mistook lighthouse presence for guaranteed safety. At least now the moral choices are deliberate and informed. Your 20th week as lighthouse keeper brings the onset of winter conditions that test both your survival skills and effectiveness of your supernatural partnership. December storms in the North Atlantic are legendary for their violence and unpredictability, creating maritime hazards that challenge even the most experienced sailors and sophisticated guidance systems. The first major winter storm develops with unprecedented speed, catching multiple ships in waters around the lighthouse during conditions that make normal navigation extremely dangerous. The spirits provide intelligence about 7 vessels in various states of distress, each facing different combinations of weather damage, navigation difficulties, and crew competence challenges. This is beyond anything we've handled before. admits the lead spirit as supernatural reconnaissance reveals the scope of the developing disaster. Weather conditions are deteriorating faster than any of the ships can reach safe harbor. Several vessels have already suffered significant damage. At least 2 are in immediate danger of foundering. The intelligence reveals a maritime crisis that exceeds the capacity of Lighthouse. Guidance to resolve through normal beacon operations. Multiple ships require specialized assistance that can only be provided through coordination with coastal rescue services, emergency harbor facilities, and possibly other vessels in the area that might provide mutual aid. Your beacon alone cannot save 7 distressed ships simultaneously, but it can serve as a coordination center for rescue operations that involve multiple participants. The Lighthouse's elevated position and communication capabilities make it the logical command post for organizing maritime rescue efforts that extend far beyond traditional beacon guidance. The storm response requires transforming the Lighthouse from a passive navigation aid into an active rescue coordination center. You use the beacon apparatus to signal different types of information to different recipients, distress alerts to coastal authorities, location information to rescue vessels, navigation guidance to ships that can still maneuver effectively, and warning signals to vessels whose situations are beyond hope of Lighthouse assistance. The spirits serve as reconnaissance and intelligence agents, monitoring each distressed vessel's condition and providing real-time updates about changing circumstances. Their supernatural mobility allows them to assess damage, evaluate crew competence, and predict which ships are most likely to survive various rescue scenarios. The merchant vessel Prosperity has lost its main mast and is taking on water, but the crew is experienced and the cargo provides adequate flotation. Reports one spirit. They can survive if rescue arrives within 6 hours. The fishing boat Northern Star has engine failure and is drifting toward the rocks, but they have a competent crew and adequate emergency equipment. They need immediate towing assistance, but should survive if help arrives quickly. The detailed intelligence allows you to prioritize rescue resources according to each vessel's specific needs and survival prospects. Ships with the best chances of survival receive maximum immediate assistance. Vessels with longer-term prospects but less immediate danger receive lower priority but continued monitoring. Ships in situations beyond hope of rescue receive minimal resources to avoid wasting efforts that might save other vessels. The coordination requires maintaining constant communication with coastal rescue services while providing navigation guidance to multiple vessels and monitoring changing weather conditions that affect all rescue operations. The workload exceeds anything a single lighthouse keeper could handle under traditional operational approaches. But the supernatural partnership provides capabilities that make coordinated rescue operations possible. The spirits handle reconnaissance and intelligence gathering while you manage communications and beacon operations. The division of labor allows for comprehensive response to maritime emergencies that would overwhelm any individual human keeper. The storm operations continue for 18 hours, during which you remain awake and active continuously while coordinating rescue efforts for 7 vessels in various stages of distress. The physical and mental demands are extreme, but the partnership structure distributes responsibilities in ways that make sustained operations possible. The final outcome exceeds your most optimistic expectations. 6 of the 7 vessels survived the storm, with 5 reaching safe harbor and 1 riding out the weather at anchor in deep water. The single loss, a cargo ship whose hull failure made survival impossible regardless of rescue efforts, validates the triage decisions that allocated limited resources to vessels with genuine survival prospects. 43 lives saved tallies the lead spirit as the storm subsides and normal operations resume. 1 ship lost with all hands, but that vessel was doomed by mechanical failure that preceded the storm. No rescue efforts could have saved them. The successful winter storm response proves that lighthouse operations can be dramatically more effective when human capabilities are augmented by supernatural intelligence and when beacon guidance is integrated into comprehensive rescue coordination systems. But it also demonstrates the extreme physical and psychological demands that such operations place on lighthouse keepers. I can't maintain this level of intensity indefinitely, you admit during the post-storm debriefing with the spirits. The coordination requirements are beyond what any individual can sustain long-term. We need to develop more efficient procedures for handling major maritime emergencies. The spirits acknowledge that the partnership has evolved beyond traditional lighthouse keeping into something that resembles a maritime rescue coordination center. The capabilities are impressive, but the sustainability is questionable unless operational procedures can be streamlined to reduce the demands on human participants. Word of your unprecedented success in maritime rescue operations begins to spread throughout the coastal maritime community. Captains whose ships were guided to safety during various emergencies report their experiences to port authorities, shipping companies, and other mariners. The lighthouse at St. Michael's Point develops a reputation for providing assistance that exceeds normal beacon guidance. Tom Corvée, during his regular supply deliveries, brings news of your growing reputation. Among local seafarers, captains are starting to plan their routes to take advantage of your lighthouse's guidance. He reports, word has spread that ships in distress receive special assistance if they can reach your area. The recognition is gratifying validation of your efforts, but it also creates new problems. Increased maritime traffic around the lighthouse means more ships requiring guidance, more potential emergencies demanding response, and higher expectations for service levels that may exceed your sustainable capacity. More concerning is the possibility that your success might attract official attention from maritime authorities who could investigate lighthouse operations and discover the supernatural. Partnership that makes your effectiveness possible. The collaboration with ghostly spirits violates conventional understanding of lighthouse keeping and could result in dismissal, institutionalization, or worse if discovered by unsympathetic officials. We need to be careful about appearing too successful. You warn the spirits during one of your regular planning discussions. If authorities investigate how we're achieving results that exceed normal lighthouse capabilities, they're likely to discover our partnership and conclude that I'm insane. The spirits share your concern about official scrutiny, though for different reasons. Their existence depends on remaining undetected by living humans who lack the supernatural sensitivity that developed during your months of isolation. Exposure could result in religious or governmental intervention that might disrupt their ability to influence physical world events. We've remained hidden for decades by avoiding dramatic manifestations that couldn't be dismissed as natural phenomena, explains the lead spirit. Your success in maritime rescue operations threatens that secrecy by demonstrating capabilities that clearly exceed normal human limitations. The dilemma requires balancing your commitment to maritime safety against the need to maintain operational security for the supernatural partnership, providing maximum assistance to ships in distress. Serves humanitarian goals that justify considerable personal risk. But endangering the partnership through excessive visibility could eliminate the enhanced capabilities that make superior rescue operations possible. You develop a policy of providing exceptional assistance only during genuine emergencies when lives are immediately threatened, while maintaining normal beacon operations during routine maritime traffic periods. The approach reduces the apparent pattern of supernatural capability while ensuring that ships in genuine distress continue to receive enhanced assistance. The policy requires making careful judgments about which situations constitute genuine emergencies worthy of exceptional response versus routine navigation challenges that should receive standard assistance. The spirit's intelligence capabilities help distinguish between genuine distress and normal operational difficulties. But the decisions still require human judgment about resource allocation and risk assessment. Brother Marcus, representing the local lord who owns the lighthouse, arrives for an unscheduled inspection during your 24th week. His visit appears to be prompted by reports of unusual lighthouse activity that have reached official attention. We've received reports that your beacon operations have become irregular, he says diplomatically during his inspection of the lighthouse facilities. Captains report receiving guidance that seems to anticipate their specific needs rather than providing standard illumination. Port authorities are curious about how you're achieving results that exceed normal lighthouse capabilities. The inspection forces you to demonstrate normal lighthouse operations while concealing the supernatural partnership that actually enables your effectiveness. The performance is challenging because you've become accustomed to operating with ghostly assistants that must remain invisible during official scrutiny. I've simply been paying closer attention to weather conditions and ship movements, you explain while conducting a routine beacon maintenance demonstration. Experience has taught me to anticipate which ships are likely to need additional guidance and which situations require emergency assistance. Brother Marcus seems satisfied with your explanation, but his probing questions suggest that official suspicions haven't been completely allayed. The inspection ends without discovery of the supernatural partnership, but the close scrutiny warns that future exceptional performance could attract more serious investigation. We're walking a dangerous line, you reflect after Brother Marcus's departure. Success in maritime rescue operations validates our approach and saves lives that justify the risks we're taking. But too much success could expose the partnership and eliminate our ability to provide any assistance at all. The spirits agree that operational security must be balanced against humanitarian effectiveness. Their historical perspective includes knowledge of previous supernatural manifestations that were discovered by authorities and terminated through religious or governmental intervention. We've seen what happens when supernatural assistance becomes too obvious to ignore, warns one spirit. Exorcisms, blessed salt barriers, official investigations that result in lighthouse closures. The partnership can only continue if it remains plausibly deniable to skeptical observers. Your 28th week brings a moral crisis that tests both your personal integrity and the supernatural partnership in unprecedented ways. A ship approaches the lighthouse during calm weather conditions, but supernatural reconnaissance reveals that the vessel is engaged in human trafficking, transporting kidnapped individuals for sale into slavery in distant ports. The ship Merchant's Pride carries legitimate cargo in its hold, reports the lead spirit, but it also carries 16 individuals who are being transported against their will. Men, women, and children who were kidnapped from coastal villages and are being sold as slaves to buyers in North Africa. The intelligence creates a moral dilemma that exceeds anything you've encountered during your tenure as lighthouse keeper. The ship poses no immediate maritime safety threat and would normally receive standard beacon guidance for safe passage through the waters around the lighthouse. But providing assistance to a vessel engaged in human trafficking makes you complicit in crimes against the kidnapped victims. What are our options? You ask the spirits. We could sabotage their navigation equipment, making them believe they're lost and encouraging them to seek assistance from coastal authorities, suggests one spirit. Or we could create apparent supernatural phenomena that frighten the crew into abandoning their criminal enterprise. Or we could simply deny them lighthouse guidance and let them navigate the dangerous waters without assistance. Each option carries significant risks and moral complications. Sabotage or supernatural interference could endanger the kidnapped victims along with the criminal crew. Denying lighthouse guidance violates the principle of providing assistance to all mariners, regardless of their moral character. But providing normal assistance facilitates human trafficking and makes the lighthouse complicit in serious crimes. The supernatural partnership has given you capabilities that extend beyond normal lighthouse keeping into active intervention in maritime crimes. But exercising these capabilities requires making moral judgments that exceed your authority as a lighthouse keeper and could expose the partnership to discovery if not handled carefully. The kidnapped individuals are innocent victims who don't deserve to suffer because of their captor's crimes. You reason, whatever action we take must prioritize their welfare over considerations of operational security or traditional lighthouse duties. You decide to provide misleading navigation guidance that directs the Merchant's Pride toward a coastal patrol area where authorities are likely to intercept and inspect the vessel. The approach requires using the beacon apparatus to signal false position information while maintaining plausible deniability about the lighthouse's role in the ship's navigation errors. The spirits assist by creating atmospheric conditions that make the false signals appear to be natural navigation hazards rather than deliberate lighthouse deception. Fog banks and optical illusions convince the ship's officers that they've miscalculated their position and need to adjust course toward what they believe are safer waters. The strategy succeeds when coastal patrol vessels intercept the Merchant's Pride and discover the kidnapped victims during a routine inspection. The traffickers are arrested, the victims are freed, and the incident is attributed to navigation errors that led the criminal vessel into patrol waters. But the intervention establishes a precedent for using lighthouse capabilities to actively combat maritime crimes rather than simply providing navigation assistance to all vessels equally. The precedent raises questions about the proper scope of lighthouse keeper responsibilities and the moral obligations that accompany supernatural partnership capabilities. We've crossed a line, you admit during post-incident discussions with the spirits. We're no longer simply providing lighthouse guidance. We're actively intervening in maritime activities based on moral judgments about the character and intentions of ship crews. The spirits argue that enhanced capabilities create enhanced responsibilities that justify intervention in situations involving serious crimes against innocent victims. Their historical perspective includes knowledge of numerous criminal activities that have passed through the waters around the lighthouse without interference from previous keepers. We've watched ships engaged in piracy, smuggling, slavery, and worse receive lighthouse guidance that helped them complete their criminal enterprises. Explains one spirit. The partnership gives us the ability to prevent crimes that we were forced to observe helplessly when we lacked the means to intervene. The debate about intervention versus neutrality continues throughout your remaining weeks as lighthouse keeper. The supernatural partnership has evolved from simple beacon assistance into a comprehensive maritime security operation that combines navigation, guidance with crime prevention, and rescue coordination. The evolution reflects the natural development of enhanced capabilities toward expanded responsibilities. But it also creates operational complexities that exceed the normal scope of lighthouse keeping. You're functioning as part lighthouse keeper, part rescue coordinator, part law enforcement agent, and part moral arbiter for maritime activities. In the waters around St. Michael's Point, this isn't what I expected when I accepted the lighthouse keeper position, you reflect. But it may be what lighthouse keeping should be when it's supported by capabilities that make comprehensive maritime security possible. The transformation of lighthouse operations from passive beacon maintenance to active maritime intervention represents a fundamental evolution in the lighthouse keeper's role. But it also creates sustainability questions about the physical and psychological demands placed on human partners in supernatural collaborations. As your first full year as lighthouse keeper approaches its end, you begin to understand that your partnership with the supernatural forces has achieved something unprecedented in the lighthouse's history: the resolution of the spiritual conflict that has plagued the installation since its construction. The ghostly spirits who initially opposed Lighthouse Operations have found constructive outlets for their maritime expertise and protective instincts through collaborative rescue operations. Instead of expressing their frustration through sabotage and harassment, they're channeling their knowledge and supernatural abilities toward preventing the kind of maritime disasters that originally claimed their lives. "We feel peaceful for the first time since our deaths," admits the lead spirit. "During one of your regular planning discussions, for decades, we've been trapped by anger over our own fate and resentment toward lighthouse operations that seem to mock our suffering. The partnership has given us purpose that honors our experience while serving the welfare of living sailors. The transformation of supernatural opposition into collaborative partnership has eliminated the psychological warfare that drove previous lighthouse keepers to madness or death. Instead of fighting against hostile forces while trying to maintain beacon operations, you're working with supernatural allies whose capabilities enhance rather than undermine lighthouse effectiveness. More remarkably, the partnership appears to be healing the spiritual wounds that created the supernatural manifestations originally. The ghostly spirits show signs of recovering from the traumatic circumstances of their deaths, developing peace and purpose that might eventually allow them to move beyond their earthly attachments. We've learned that lighthouse keeping can serve maritime safety when it's practiced with wisdom and discrimination, rather than simply maintaining generic beacon guidance," explains one spirit. "The lighthouse isn't our enemy. Poor lighthouse keeping practices were our enemy. Good lighthouse keeping serves the same goals we've always embraced." The revelation suggests that the supernatural phenomena around the lighthouse were never fundamentally opposed to lighthouse operations, but rather to lighthouse practices that ignored the complexities and moral responsibilities of providing navigation guidance in dangerous waters. Your success in developing collaborative approaches to lighthouse keeping has demonstrated that beacon operations can be both effective and ethically responsible when human capabilities are enhanced by supernatural intelligence, and when lighthouse keepers acknowledge the moral dimensions of their work. The spiritual healing extends beyond the immediate supernatural partnership to affect the entire lighthouse environment. The oppressive atmosphere that characterized the installation during your early weeks has been replaced by a sense of purpose and cooperation that makes lighthouse keeping psychologically sustainable rather than mentally destructive. "The lighthouse feels different now," you note in your journal, "not just because I've adapted to the isolation and responsibility, but because the spiritual conflicts that made the environment hostile have been resolved through collaborative partnership." The change is noticeable to outside observers as well. Tom Corvée comments on the improved atmosphere during his supply deliveries. "You look healthier than any lighthouse keeper I've seen in 20 years of working these waters." He observes, "Whatever you're doing here, it's working better than anything previous keepers tried." Brother Marcus, during his periodic inspections, notes the improved maintenance of lighthouse facilities and the enhanced effectiveness of beacon operations, while he doesn't understand the supernatural partnership that enables these improvements. He recognizes that lighthouse keeping at St. Michael's Point has achieved unprecedented success under your tenure. The local lord is extremely satisfied with lighthouse operations. Brother Marcus reports, "Maritime casualties in this area have dropped to the lowest levels in recorded history. Shipping companies are specifically requesting routing through these waters because of the superior navigation assistance available from your lighthouse." The recognition validates your decision to negotiate with the supernatural forces rather than simply opposing them. The collaborative approach has achieved results that exceed anything possible through traditional lighthouse keeping methods, while creating sustainable working conditions that don't destroy the keeper's mental health. Most importantly, the partnership has demonstrated that supernatural phenomena can be constructive rather than destructive when approached with empathy, creativity, and willingness to acknowledge the legitimate concerns of non-human intelligences. The success of the partnership raises questions about other institutional conflicts that might be resolved through collaborative approaches rather than confrontational resistance. Supernatural manifestations in other locations might represent similar opportunities for cooperation rather than simply problems requiring elimination. We've proven that the living and the dead can work together for common goals, reflects the lead spirit. The partnership could serve as a model for resolving spiritual conflicts in other locations where supernatural phenomena interfere with human activities. The suggestion opens possibilities for your future beyond lighthouse keeping at St. Michael's Point. The experience and knowledge gained through the supernatural partnership might qualify you for addressing similar conflicts at other installations where traditional approaches have proven inadequate. But for now, the immediate focus remains on maintaining the successful partnership that has transformed lighthouse keeping from a nightmare of isolation and supernatural harassment into a collaborative enterprise that serves maritime safety more effectively than any traditional beacon operation. As your second year as lighthouse keeper begins, you face a decision that will determine not only your personal future, but the long-term fate of the supernatural partnership that has revolutionized maritime safety in the waters around St. Michael's Point. Tom Corvey brings news that other coastal installations are experiencing supernatural phenomena similar to what originally plagued your lighthouse. Port authorities and maritime organizations are seeking experienced individuals who might be able to address these problems based on the successful resolution achieved at St. Michael's Point. There's a lighthouse up the coast at Raven's Rock that's had 3 keepers disappear in the last 6 months. Corvey reports another installation at Devil's Harbor has been reporting equipment failures and strange lights that interfere with beacon operations. Authorities are desperate to find someone who understands how to deal with supernatural problems at maritime facilities. The opportunity represents a chance to expand the collaborative approach that has proven successful at St. Michael's Point to other installations where traditional lighthouse keeping methods are failing due to supernatural interference. Your experience in negotiating with ghostly spirits and developing partnership arrangements could potentially resolve conflicts that are currently making multiple lighthouse positions untenable. But accepting such assignments would require leaving the partnership that has consumed over a year of intensive development. The supernatural alliance at St. Michael's Point depends on personal relationships and trust. That has been built through shared experiences and mutual respect. Starting over at new installations would mean beginning the negotiation process, again with different spiritual entities who might have different grievances and different attitudes toward collaboration. What do you think? You ask the spirits. During a partnership planning discussion, should we try to expand the collaborative approach to other lighthouse installations? Or should we focus on maintaining and improving operations here? The spirits are divided in their responses. Some argue for expansion of the partnership model to locations where their supernatural colleagues are experiencing similar conflicts with lighthouse operations. Others prefer to concentrate on perfecting the collaborative system that has proven successful rather than diluting efforts across multiple installations. We could serve as consultants to help you establish partnerships at other locations, suggests the lead spirit. Our experience in resolving conflicts between the living and the dead could be valuable for addressing supernatural problems that traditional approaches can't solve. The consultation model offers a compromise that maintains the core partnership at St. Michael's Point while extending collaborative principles to other installations. You could retain your primary position while temporarily visiting other lighthouse facilities to assess supernatural phenomena and recommend partnership approaches. The proposal appeals to your sense of moral responsibility for addressing problems that you now understand how to solve. The suffering of lighthouse keepers at other installations mirrors your own early experiences at St. Michael's Point. If collaborative approaches can eliminate that suffering, while improving maritime safety. You have an obligation to share the knowledge and experience that make such partnerships possible. But the consultation work would also expose the supernatural partnership to increased scrutiny from maritime authorities, who might become suspicious about your methods for resolving problems that have defeated traditional approaches. Success at multiple installations could attract official attention that threatens the operational security necessary for continued partnership effectiveness. We're facing the same dilemma that has challenged us throughout the partnership. You observe. Success creates opportunities for expanded service, but it also increases risks of discovery that could eliminate our ability to provide any service at all. The spirits acknowledge the tension between humanitarian goals and operational security. Their historical perspective includes knowledge of supernatural partnerships in other contexts that were terminated when they became too visible to skeptical authorities. Perhaps the solution is selective expansion, suggests one spirit. We could assist with the most desperate situations where lighthouse keepers are in immediate danger, while avoiding involvement in cases where traditional methods might eventually succeed. The selective approach would prioritize life-threatening supernatural conflicts while minimizing exposure risks that accompany widespread consultation activities. The strategy acknowledges both the moral obligation to help endangered lighthouse keepers and the practical necessity of protecting partnership arrangements that enable such assistance. You decide to accept consultation assignments on a limited basis, focusing on installations where supernatural phenomena pose immediate threats to keeper safety or beacon reliability. The approach allows for sharing collaborative techniques while maintaining the primary partnership that serves as the foundation for all expanded activities. The decision establishes a new phase in your evolution from lighthouse keeper to supernatural partnership consultant. The role carries greater responsibilities and higher risks, but it also offers opportunities to address institutional problems that have plagued maritime safety throughout the coastal regions. We're pioneering approaches that could revolutionize how human institutions deal with supernatural phenomena. You reflect during discussions with the spirits. The lighthouse partnerships could serve as models for resolving conflicts between the living and the dead in other contexts where traditional methods have proven inadequate. The vision extends beyond maritime applications to encompass any institutional setting where supernatural phenomena interfere with human activities. The collaborative principles developed through Lighthouse Partnership could potentially address haunting situations, poltergeist activities, and other manifestations where spiritual conflicts disrupt normal operations. But the immediate focus remains on lighthouse applications where your expertise and the spirit's capabilities have proven most effective. Each successful partnership at a new installation validates the collaborative approach while building experience that enhances future consultation effectiveness. Your first consultation assignment takes you to Ravens Rock Lighthouse, an installation 40 miles north of St. Michael's Point, where 3 lighthouse keepers have disappeared under mysterious circumstances within 6 months. The facility has been abandoned for 2 weeks because no one can be found willing to accept the position even temporarily. The journey to Ravens Rock requires coordinating with the spirits at St. Michael's Point to ensure that beacon operations continue during your absence. The supernatural partnership has become so integral to lighthouse effectiveness that temporary departures require careful planning to maintain service levels that the maritime community has come to expect. We'll maintain standard beacon operations while you're away, promises the lead spirit. The apparatus can be controlled through supernatural manipulation of mechanical systems. Though we can't provide the complex emergency response capabilities that require human coordination with coastal authorities, the arrangement represents a new phase in the partnership where supernatural capabilities partially compensate for human absence. The development suggests that the spirits have become invested in lighthouse operations beyond simply resolving their historical grievances against maritime institutions. Raven's Rock Lighthouse proves to be a more challenging environment than Michael's Point, with supernatural phenomena that are more aggressive and less organized than the ghostly spirits you've learned to work with. The installation is plagued by poltergeist activities, equipment sabotage, and physical manifestations that appear designed to drive away human occupants rather than address specific grievances about lighthouse operations. Your first night at Raven's Rock brings violent supernatural harassment that exceeds anything you experienced during your early weeks at St. Michael's Point. Objects are thrown around the lighthouse by invisible forces. The beacon apparatus is repeatedly sabotaged in ways that require constant repair efforts. Most disturbing, supernatural forces attempt direct physical assault rather than the psychological warfare that characterize your previous experiences. This is different. You note, while documenting the phenomena for later analysis, the supernatural entities here seem to be focused on eliminating human presence rather than addressing institutional concerns about lighthouse operations. They're not trying to negotiate or communicate. They're trying to drive away or destroy anyone who attempts to maintain the lighthouse. The difference in supernatural behavior suggests that not all lighthouse hauntings are caused by the same type of spiritual conflicts that affected St. Michael's Point. The entities at Raven's Rock appear to be motivated by territorial claims rather than maritime safety concerns, making collaborative partnership approaches potentially inappropriate or impossible. Your attempts to communicate with the supernatural forces at Raven's Rock are met with increased aggression rather than curiosity about negotiation possibilities. The entities seem to interpret communication attempts as challenges to their territorial control rather than overtures for cooperative problem-solving. The situation requires developing new approaches for dealing with supernatural phenomena that are fundamentally hostile rather than simply misdirected. The collaborative techniques that prove successful at St. Michael's Point are inadequate for addressing entities that have no interest in maritime safety and no willingness to consider partnership arrangements. After 3 days of escalating supernatural harassment, you conclude that the Raven's Rock situation cannot be resolved through negotiation and partnership approaches. The supernatural entities are too aggressive and too focused on territorial exclusion to consider collaborative alternatives to confrontational resistance. Some spiritual conflicts can't be resolved through cooperation. You report to maritime authorities when you return from the consultation. The supernatural phenomena at Raven's Rock appear to be territorial rather than institutional. The entities want humans excluded from the area entirely, not just changes in lighthouse operations. The assessment leads to a recommendation that Raven's Rock Lighthouse be abandoned permanently rather than continuing attempts to staff the installation. The supernatural opposition is too intense and too uncompromising to allow effective lighthouse operations regardless of staffing approaches or partnership strategies. The Raven's Rock experience teaches you that supernatural consultation work requires careful assessment of phenomena types before attempting resolution strategies. Collaborative approaches work for entities with legitimate grievances about institutional operations, but they're inappropriate for territorial spirits or malevolent entities that oppose human presence entirely. The lesson influences your criteria for accepting future consultation assignments. You develop screening procedures for distinguishing between supernatural phenomena that might respond to partnership approaches versus manifestations that require different resolution strategies or permanent abandonment of affected installations. Not every supernatural problem can be solved through negotiation and collaboration. You conclude in your consultation report, some spiritual entities have goals that are fundamentally incompatible with human institutional operations. Partnership approaches should be reserved for situations where supernatural concerns can be addressed through modified operational procedures. The Raven's Rock consultation establishes your reputation as someone who can provide realistic assessments of supernatural phenomena rather than simply attempting to apply collaborative solutions to every manifestation regardless of appropriateness. The realistic approach proves valuable to maritime authorities who need accurate evaluations of installation viability rather than optimistic promises about partnership possibilities that might not be achievable in specific circumstances. Over the following months, your consultation work leads to successful partnership establishments at 3 additional lighthouse installations, while confirming that 2 others require permanent abandonment due to irreconcilable supernatural opposition. The varied outcomes establish patterns that help identify which situations are amenable to collaborative resolution versus those requiring alternative approaches. The successful partnerships share common characteristics. Supernatural entities with legitimate grievances about lighthouse operations, willingness to consider alternatives to confrontational resistance, and sufficient supernatural capabilities to contribute meaningfully to enhanced beacon effectiveness. The failed consultations involve territorial spirits, malevolent entities, or phenomena too chaotic to support coherent partnership arrangements. We're developing a network of collaborative lighthouse installations that share information and coordinate responses to regional maritime emergencies. You report to the spirits at St. Michael's Point during one of your return visits. The partnerships are beginning to function as an integrated maritime safety system rather than isolated individual operations. The network development represents an evolution beyond individual lighthouse partnerships toward comprehensive regional coordination that leverages supernatural capabilities across multiple installations. Ships traveling through the regional waters can receive continuous guidance and emergency assistance from a coordinated system that tracks maritime traffic and coordinates rescue operations. The enhanced capabilities prove their value during a major winter storm that affects the entire coastal region. The Lighthouse Network coordinates rescue operations for over 20 vessels in various states of distress, with supernatural intelligence from multiple installations, providing comprehensive coverage of weather conditions, ship movements, and emergency situations throughout the affected waters. 37 lives saved through coordinated operations. Tallies the lead spirit at St. Michael's Point after the storm operations conclude. Individual lighthouse partnerships wouldn't have achieved these results, but network coordination allowed for resource allocation and emergency response that exceeded the sum of individual installation capabilities. The network's success attracts official attention from maritime authorities, who recognize the improved safety statistics in the region, but remain puzzled about the operational methods that enable such effectiveness. The enhanced results exceed normal lighthouse capabilities by margins that suggest systematic rather than accidental improvements. Brother Marcus arrives for an unscheduled inspection, accompanied by officials from the Regional Maritime Authority, who want to understand how lighthouse operations in the area have achieved unprecedented effectiveness levels. We've reviewed maritime casualty statistics for the past 18 months, explains the lead maritime official. Shipping losses in this coastal region have dropped to less than 10% of historical averages. More remarkably, rescue success rates have increased to levels that exceed anything achieved in other coastal regions. We need to understand how these improvements have been accomplished so they can be implemented elsewhere. The official inquiry forces you to provide explanations for network effectiveness that conceal the supernatural partnerships, while highlighting operational improvements that can be attributed to conventional techniques. The challenge requires demonstrating enhanced lighthouse keeping methods without revealing the supernatural capabilities that make such enhancements possible. I've developed systematic approaches to weather observation, ship tracking, and emergency coordination that improve traditional lighthouse operations. You explain while conducting demonstrations of conventional beacon maintenance and communication procedures. The key is integrating lighthouse guidance with coastal rescue services. and coordinating responses across multiple installations. The explanation satisfies the officials' immediate concerns, while avoiding supernatural topics that would discredit the operational improvements or endanger the partnership arrangements. The conventional techniques you demonstrate are legitimate enhancements that could improve Lighthouse effectiveness even without supernatural assistance. But the official interest in replicating network results at other coastal regions creates pressure for expanding consultation services beyond your current capacity. Maritime authorities want systematic implementation of enhanced Lighthouse techniques throughout their jurisdictions, requiring consultation work that would exceed your ability to maintain while preserving primary partnership responsibilities at St. Michael's Point. We're facing success problems again, you observed during discussions. With the spirits, the network effectiveness is generating demands for expansion that could compromise the partnerships that make effectiveness possible. The dilemma requires balancing humanitarian goals for improved maritime safety against operational security needs for partnership protection. Expanded consultation work could save lives at additional installations, but excessive visibility could expose supernatural partnerships to official scrutiny that terminates all collaborative arrangements. Perhaps it's time to train other Lighthouse keepers in partnership techniques, suggests one spirit. You could select individuals who show aptitude for supernatural communication and teach them collaboration methods that don't require your direct involvement. The training approach offers potential for systematic expansion without creating unsustainable demands on your personal consultation services. Other Lighthouse keepers could learn partnership development techniques while you focus on maintaining primary installation operations and providing specialized consultation for the most challenging supernatural situations. The training program requires developing systematic methods for teaching supernatural partnership skills to individuals who may not have natural aptitude for spiritual communication. The techniques that you've learned through direct experience must be codified into training procedures that can be transmitted to others. The development of training procedures for supernatural partnership requires analyzing your own experiences to identify teachable techniques that other Lighthouse keepers can learn without possessing natural psychic sensitivity. The process reveals that successful partnership development depends more on psychological approaches and communication skills than on supernatural abilities. The key factors appear to be empathy for supernatural grievances, willingness to consider collaborative alternatives to confrontational resistance, and patience for developing trust through consistent behavior over extended periods. You summarize in training materials prepared for potential partnership candidates. The training program begins with careful selection of Lighthouse keepers who demonstrate appropriate temperament and circumstances for partnership development. Candidates must be isolated enough to avoid official scrutiny, psychologically stable enough to handle supernatural phenomena, and professionally competent enough to maintain Lighthouse operations while developing partnership relationships. Your first training candidate is William Porter, the experienced Lighthouse keeper you met during your early weeks at St. Michael's Point, who expressed interest in alternative approaches to Lighthouse operations. Porter has demonstrated both professional competence and philosophical flexibility that suggests potential for successful partnership development. I've seen enough strange phenomena over the years to know that traditional lighthouse keeping doesn't address all the challenges we face. Porter acknowledges during preliminary training discussions, if there are ways to work with supernatural forces rather than simply enduring them, I'm interested in learning those techniques. The training process begins with theoretical preparation that helps candidates understand the historical and psychological factors that create supernatural manifestations around maritime installations. The knowledge provides context for partnership development that reduces fear and increases empathy for spiritual entities who may initially appear threatening. Most supernatural phenomena around lighthouses result from accumulated maritime casualties in the waters that the installations are supposed to protect. You explained during Porter's theoretical training. The entities involved are usually spirits of drowned sailors who resent lighthouse operations that failed to save them, or that provide false hope to other mariners facing similar dangers. The theoretical framework helps candidates approach supernatural phenomena with appropriate expectations and responses. Instead of reacting with fear or hostility to ghostly manifestations, trained lighthouse keepers can recognize opportunities for communication and potential partnership development. Practical training involves supervised exposure to supernatural phenomena under controlled conditions. Porter accompanies you during return visits to St. Michael's Point, where he can observe established partnership operations and gradually participate in collaborative lighthouse activities. The key is treating supernatural entities as colleagues rather than threats. You demonstrate during Porter's first exposure to partnership operations. They have knowledge and capabilities that complement human skills, but they also have concerns and grievances that must be acknowledged and addressed. Porter's initial reactions to supernatural manifestations show the normal fear and disorientation that characterize first encounters with ghostly entities. But his professional experience provides psychological resilience that allows him to overcome initial shock and focus on learning partnership techniques. They're more intelligent and more rational than I expected, Porter observes after his first extended conversation with the spirits at St. Michael's Point. I anticipated mindless haunting phenomena, but these entities have specific concerns and legitimate grievances that make sense when you understand their historical experiences. The training program proves successful when Porter establishes his first tentative partnership arrangement with supernatural entities at his own lighthouse installation. The process requires several months of patient negotiation, but it ultimately results in collaborative operations that improve both maritime safety and keeper psychological welfare at Porter's facility. The partnership approach works, Porter reports after 6 months of collaborative lighthouse operations. Not only are rescue operations more effective, but the job has become psychologically sustainable in ways that traditional lighthouse keeping never achieved. The training success validates the systematic approach to partnership development and provides a model for expanded training programs that could address supernatural phenomena at lighthouse installations throughout coastal regions. Maritime authorities begin requesting training services for lighthouse keepers at installations where traditional operations are failing due to supernatural interference. The demand grows rapidly as word spreads about the effectiveness of partnership approaches for resolving problems that conventional methods cannot address. We're approaching a transition point where a supernatural partnership could become standard practice for lighthouse operations rather than experimental technique. You observed during discussions with the spirits at St. Michael's Point. The training program could revolutionize how maritime institutions address supernatural phenomena. The potential transformation excites the spirits who have invested years in developing collaborative approaches to lighthouse operations. Their historical perspective encompasses decades of futile resistance to lighthouse activities that ignored their concerns and capabilities. This could resolve supernatural conflicts at maritime installations throughout the coastal regions, reflects the lead spirit. Instead of ongoing warfare between the living and the dead, we could establish systematic cooperation that serves maritime safety more effectively than either traditional lighthouse operations or supernatural opposition. The vision of systematic supernatural partnership throughout maritime institutions represents the ultimate validation of collaborative approaches that began with desperate negotiations between a terrified lighthouse keeper and hostile, ghostly entities. The transformation from individual survival strategy to institutional reform methodology demonstrates the potential for supernatural partnership in other contexts beyond lighthouse operations. 3 years after your initial appointment as lighthouse keeper at St. Michael's Point, supernatural partnership has evolved from desperate improvisation to systematic institutional practice at 17 lighthouse installations throughout the coastal region. Maritime casualty statistics show unprecedented improvement, with shipping losses reduced to less than 5% of historical averages. The success attracts attention from maritime authorities in other countries who want to understand and potentially replicate the operational methods that have revolutionized coastal navigation safety. Delegations of foreign officials arrive to study partnership techniques and assess their applicability to international maritime installations. The results speak for themselves, observes the regional maritime director during a formal review of partnership program outcomes. Whatever methods you've developed here represent the most significant advancement in lighthouse operations since the introduction of oil-burning beacon apparatus. The official recognition validates years of patient development work while creating new challenges for maintaining operational security around supernatural partnership arrangements. International attention increases scrutiny that could expose collaborative methods to skeptical authorities, who might terminate programs based on religious or scientific objections to supernatural phenomena. We're successful enough to be dangerous to ourselves. You reflect during planning discussions with the spirits at St. Michael's Point. The partnership methods work so well that they're attracting attention that could eliminate our ability to practice them. The spirits share your concerns about exposure risks, but they also recognize opportunities for expanding collaborative approaches beyond maritime applications to other institutional contexts where supernatural phenomena interfere with human activities. The techniques we've developed could address spiritual conflicts in hospitals, schools, government buildings, and other institutions where traditional approaches have failed to resolve supernatural problems, suggests one spirit. The principles of empathy, communication, and collaborative problem-solving apply to any situation where the living and the living and the dead must coexist. The expanded applications offer possibilities for institutional reform that extends far beyond lighthouse operations to encompass any setting where supernatural phenomena disrupt normal activities. The partnership principles could potentially revolutionize how human institutions address spiritual conflicts that currently result in abandonment, exorcism, or other confrontational approaches. But expanded applications also create risks of exposure that increase exponentially with each new partnership arrangement. The more widely supernatural collaboration is practiced, the more likely it becomes that skeptical authorities will investigate methods and discover techniques that violate conventional understanding of spiritual phenomena. You develop a strategy of selective expansion that focuses on the most promising applications while maintaining security protocols that protect established partnerships from discovery. The approach prioritizes life-threatening supernatural conflicts, while avoiding involvement in situations where conventional methods might eventually succeed. The selection criteria include assessment of supernatural phenomena types, evaluation of institutional security arrangements, and analysis of potential exposure risks that could compromise existing partnership operations. Each new application is carefully screened to ensure compatibility with collaborative approaches and minimal risk to established programs. We're building a hidden network of supernatural partnerships that can eventually transform how human institutions address spiritual conflicts. You explain to maritime officials who request expanded training services, but the network must remain invisible to skeptical authorities who lack understanding of collaborative methods. The hidden network concept appeals to officials who have witnessed partnership effectiveness, but understand the political risks of acknowledging supernatural collaboration openly. The approach allows for systematic expansion while maintaining plausible deniability about methods that exceed conventional institutional capabilities. Over the following year, The hidden network expands to encompass 47 institutions throughout the coastal regions and adjacent inland areas. Hospitals report dramatic reductions in unexplained patient disturbances. Schools experience elimination of disruptive supernatural phenomena that previously interfered with educational activities. Government buildings achieve resolution of haunting situations that had made certain facilities unusable. The institutional revolution is succeeding beyond our most optimistic expectations, reports one of the trained partnership coordinators during a network review meeting. Supernatural conflicts that have plagued institutions for decades are being resolved through collaborative approaches that create beneficial outcomes for both living and dead participants. The success validates the principle that supernatural phenomena represent opportunities for institutional improvement rather than simply problems requiring elimination. The partnerships enhance institutional effectiveness while providing constructive outlets for spiritual entities whose concerns had been ignored or suppressed through traditional confrontational methods. But the revolution also creates sustainability challenges as demand for partnership services exceeds the supply of qualified coordinators who can develop collaborative arrangements safely and effectively. Training programs must be expanded to meet institutional demand while maintaining quality control that prevents exposure of partnership methods to hostile authorities. We need to systematize training procedures while preserving the personal relationships and trust development that make partnerships successful. You observe during network planning discussions. Institutional expansion requires standardized methods, but supernatural collaboration depends on individual empathy and communication, skills that can't be easily systematized. The challenge requires balancing systematic expansion against the personal nature of supernatural partnership that makes each collaborative arrangement unique. The solution involves developing training programs that teach general principles, while allowing flexibility for individual adaptation to specific supernatural entities and institutional contexts. 5 years of supernatural partnership development has transformed you from a desperate plague refugee seeking isolated employment into a recognized expert in collaborative approaches to spiritual conflicts. But the transformation has come at considerable personal cost that becomes more apparent as the institutional revolution achieves systematic success. The constant travel required for consultation services, training programs, and network coordination has made it impossible to maintain stable personal relationships or establish normal social connections. Your expertise in supernatural phenomena makes you valuable to institutions facing spiritual conflicts, but it also makes you seem strange and potentially dangerous to ordinary people who lack understanding of collaborative methods. I've become a specialist in relationships with the dead while losing the ability to form relationships with the living. You reflect during a rare period of solitude at St. Michael's Point. The partnership work has consumed my life in ways that make normal human existence increasingly difficult. The isolation is compounded by the secret nature of partnership methods that prevents you from discussing your work openly with anyone outside the hidden network. The most meaningful aspects of your professional life must be concealed from family, friends, and potential romantic partners who couldn't understand or accept supernatural collaboration. The spirits at St. Michael's Point have become your primary social connections, providing intellectual stimulation and emotional support that replace the human relationships that partnership work has made impossible. But relationships with supernatural entities, however meaningful, cannot fully substitute for connections with living people who share your mortality and physical existence. We've become your family, acknowledges the lead spirit during one of your conversations. But we understand that the living need connections with other living beings for psychological completeness. The partnership work has isolated you from your own kind in ways that may not be sustainable indefinitely. The psychological toll extends beyond social isolation to encompass the constant stress of maintaining secret methods while managing institutional expectations for continued success. The responsibility for preserving partnership arrangements while expanding network operations creates pressure that affects physical health and mental stability. Sleep becomes irregular due to consultation travel and emergency coordination requirements that ignore normal work schedules. Eating patterns deteriorate as partnership responsibilities interfere with routine self-care. Most concerning, you begin experiencing supernatural sensitivity that makes it difficult to function in normal environments where spiritual phenomena are present but not acknowledged. I can see and hear supernatural entities everywhere now, you note during a medical consultation about persistent exhaustion and anxiety symptoms. The sensitivity that developed through partnership work has generalized to all spiritual phenomena, making it difficult to ignore supernatural activities that most people never notice. The enhanced supernatural awareness becomes both an asset for partnership work and a liability for normal social functioning. The ability to detect spiritual phenomena makes you more effective at developing collaborative arrangements. But it also creates constant distraction and stress when operating in environments where supernatural activities are ignored or suppressed. The medical consultation reveals physical symptoms consistent with chronic stress and exhaustion that require significant lifestyle modifications to prevent serious health deterioration. But the partnership work has become so integral to your identity and purpose that reducing professional responsibility seems impossible despite medical warnings. The network depends on your coordination and expertise, argues one of the trained partnership coordinators when you discuss potential reduction in consultation work. Institutional expansion would be severely limited without your involvement in training programs and partnership development. The argument reflects the success trap that has characterized partnership development from its earliest stages. Effectiveness creates demand that exceeds sustainable capacity, forcing choices between personal welfare and institutional responsibilities that serve humanitarian goals. Tom Corvée, during one of his continuing supply deliveries to St. Michael's Point, provides perspective on your situation that helps clarify the personal cost of professional success. His long-term observation of lighthouse keepers gives him unique insight into the psychological effects of your work. You've achieved something remarkable here, he acknowledges, but you're paying the same price Edmund Blackwater paid, just in a different way. He was consumed by fighting the supernatural forces. You're being consumed by working with them. The end result is the same. You're disappearing into the work, losing yourself in responsibilities that no one person should carry alone. His observation forces you to confront the reality of the partnership. Success has created its own form of psychological imprisonment. Instead of being trapped by supernatural harassment, you're trapped by supernatural collaboration that demands constant tension and prevents normal human existence. The difference, you respond, is that the partnership work serves humanitarian goals that justify personal sacrifice. Lives are being saved, institutional problems are being resolved, and collaborative methods are proving that supernatural phenomena can be constructive rather than destructive. But Carvey's skeptical expression suggests that he questions whether humanitarian achievements justify the complete abandonment of personal life and individual welfare. His perspective represents normal human values that prioritize individual happiness and social connection over institutional service and professional achievement. Saving other people's lives is admirable, he replies, but not if it means destroying your own life in the process. You're becoming as isolated as the spirits you work with, and that isolation is making you less human, not more effective. The conversation continues for hours, with Corvée arguing for personal balance and you defending professional dedication. But his arguments resonate with growing awareness that partnership work has indeed isolated you from normal human experience in ways that may be irreversible. As your 6th year at ST, Michael's point begins. The question of succession becomes increasingly urgent. Your health continues to deteriorate under the stress of network coordination. Your social isolation deepens despite professional success. And your supernatural sensitivity has reached levels that make normal social functioning extremely difficult. The spirits at St. Michael's Point have become concerned about your welfare and the sustainability of partnership arrangements that depend so heavily on your personal involvement. Their historical perspective includes knowledge of other collaborative relationships that failed when human participants were overwhelmed by responsibilities that exceeded individual capacity. You need to identify and train successors who can assume coordination responsibilities before your own capabilities are compromised beyond recovery, advises the lead spirit. The network has become too dependent on your personal involvement. To survive if you become unable to continue the work, the succession planning requires identifying individuals with appropriate temperament, training them in partnership techniques, and gradually transferring coordination responsibilities while maintaining network effectiveness. The process is complicated by the personal nature of supernatural partnerships that resist systematic transfer of relationships and trust. Your most promising successor candidate is Sarah Whitmore, a former hospital administrator who lost her position after advocating for alternative approaches to patients experiencing supernatural phenomena. A professional background in institutional management combined with openness to spiritual collaboration makes her ideal for network coordination responsibilities. I've witnessed supernatural phenomena throughout my career in healthcare, Whitmore explains during initial training discussions. Patients reporting ghostly visitors, unexplained equipment failures in certain rooms, healing outcomes that couldn't be explained through conventional medicine. The hospital administration preferred to ignore these phenomena rather than investigate them systematically. Her institutional experience provides crucial background for understanding the organizational challenges involved in supernatural partnership, while her healthcare training offers skills in patient advocacy that translate well to spiritual entity relationships. The training process for network coordination proves more complex than individual partnership development because it requires understanding multiple collaborative arrangements simultaneously, while maintaining coordination between different supernatural entities who may have conflicting interests or approaches. Each partnership is unique, you explained during Whitmore's advanced training, but there are common principles that allow for systematic coordination. The key is treating each supernatural entity as an individual with specific concerns, while maintaining network cohesion through shared commitment to institutional improvement. Whitmore's administrative skills prove valuable for managing the documentation, scheduling, and resource allocation required for network operations. But her most important qualification is emotional intelligence that allows her to develop rapport with supernatural entities while maintaining perspective on human institutional needs. The spirits respond well to her, observes the lead spirit. At St. Michael's Point, after several months of joint operations, she has the empathy necessary for partnership development, combined with the organizational skills required for network coordination. She could potentially assume your responsibilities without compromising partnership effectiveness. The gradual transition of coordination responsibilities to Whitmore provides relief from the constant stress that has dominated your life for 6 years while ensuring continuity of network operations. But the process also forces recognition of how completely partnership work has defined your identity and purpose. I don't know who I am without the coordination work, you admit during one of your final training sessions with Whitmore. The partnership responsibilities have consumed so much of my life that stepping back creates an identity crisis. What do I do with myself if I'm not coordinating supernatural collaborations? The question reflects a common problem for individuals whose professional lives become so consuming that retirement or career transition becomes psychologically impossible. The partnership work has provided meaning and purpose that made personal. Sacrifice seemed worthwhile, but it has also prevented development of other interests and relationships that could provide fulfillment. Whitmore, with her healthcare background, recognizes the symptoms of professional burnout and identity confusion that affect individuals who have devoted themselves completely to institutional service. Her recommendations focus on gradual transition rather than abrupt retirement that could create psychological crisis. You don't have to abandon partnership work entirely, she suggests, but you need to establish boundaries that allow for personal life and individual welfare. The network can function without your constant involvement if coordination responsibilities are distributed among multiple trained individuals. The distributed coordination model reduces dependence on any single individual while providing redundancy that protects network operations from disruption due to personal crises or individual limitations. The approach acknowledges that systematic supernatural partnership requires organizational structures that can survive the loss of founding coordinators. The transition from primary network coordinator to senior advisor creates opportunities for reconnecting with aspects of human existence that partnership work had made impossible. For the first time in 6 years, you have time for personal relationships, individual interests, and normal social activities that don't involve supernatural phenomena. The adjustment proves more difficult than anticipated because supernatural sensitivity has become so acute that ignoring spiritual phenomena requires constant effort and mental energy. Normal social environments contain supernatural activities that most people don't notice, but that create constant distraction for someone trained to detect and interact with ghostly entities. Learning to ignore supernatural phenomena is like learning to ignore loud music or bright lights. You explained to Sarah Whitmore during discussions about coordination transition challenges. The sensitivity can't be turned off, but it can be managed through conscious effort and environmental modifications. The environmental modifications include avoiding locations with intense supernatural activity and limiting exposure to situations where spiritual phenomena demand attention or response. The restrictions reduce social opportunities, but make normal functioning possible for someone whose supernatural awareness exceeds normal human ranges. Reconnecting with Tom Corvée provides crucial support for readjustment to normal social interaction. His long-term knowledge of your work, combined with lack of involvement in partnership operations, makes him ideal for bridging the gap between supernatural collaboration and ordinary human relationships. You're still the same person you were before. The partnership work, he reassures during one of your conversations. The supernatural abilities and institutional knowledge are additions to your identity, not replacements for your human nature. You just need to remember how to access the parts of yourself that existed before the Lighthouse work began. The process of rediscovering pre-partnership interests and capabilities proves both challenging and rewarding. Skills and relationships that seem permanently lost begin to return as you invest time and attention in activities that don't involve supernatural phenomena or institutional coordination. Most importantly, you begin developing romantic relationships that had been impossible during the intensive coordination period. Meeting and connecting with someone who shares normal human concerns while accepting your unusual professional background requires careful balance between honesty and discretion. I work as a consultant for maritime institutions. You explain to potential romantic partners, specializing in operational problems that traditional approaches haven't resolved successfully. The work involves a lot of travel and some unusual challenges, but it's rewarding because it helps save lives and improve safety. The description is accurate without revealing supernatural elements that could create relationship complications for people who lack understanding of spiritual phenomena. The approach allows for normal romantic development while preserving operational security for partnership activities. your relationship with Margaret Holly develops gradually over several months of careful courtship that respects both your supernatural sensitivity and her lack of experience with spiritual phenomena. She's a teacher whose practical intelligence and emotional stability provide grounding in normal human concerns. You're different from other men I've met, she observes during one of your dates. More serious, more aware of things that others seem to miss, but also kinder and more thoughtful than most people. Whatever work you do, it shaped you in positive ways. The relationship provides validation that partnership work, despite its personal costs, has developed character traits that enhance rather than diminish your capacity for human connection. The empathy, patience, and communication skills learned through supernatural collaboration translate well to romantic relationships and normal social interaction. As your personal life stabilizes and professional responsibilities become more manageable, you begin to understand that the partnership work, rather than destroying your humanity, has actually enhanced it in ways that make you a more complete and effective person. The supernatural collaboration taught me things about empathy, cooperation, and conflict resolution that I never could have learned through normal human relationships. You reflect during conversations with Margaret about your work. The skills translate to any situation where different parties need to find common ground. Despite fundamental differences in perspective or capabilities, 10 years after your initial appointment as lighthouse keeper at St. Michael's Point, the supernatural partnership network has expanded to encompass over 200 institutions throughout Europe and beyond. Maritime casualties in partnership regions have dropped to less than 2% of historical averages, while other institutional applications have resolved supernatural problems that had plagued facilities for decades or centuries. The success has attracted scholarly attention from universities and research institutions that want to understand the systematic approaches to spiritual phenomena that have achieved unprecedented results. Academic delegations arrive to study partnership methods and assess their implications for broader understanding of supernatural manifestations. What you've developed here represents a paradigm shift in how human institutions can address spiritual conflicts, observes Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, a professor of social sciences who has been studying partnership outcomes. The collaborative approaches challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between the living and the dead that have shaped institutional policies for centuries. The academic interest validates partnership methods while creating opportunities for systematic documentation and analysis that could support broader implementation of collaborative approaches. University research could provide theoretical frameworks that explain partnership effectiveness, while developing training methods that reduce dependence on individual expertise and intuitive communication skills. But academic scrutiny also creates risks of exposure that could threaten partnership arrangements if supernatural collaboration is subjected to scientific investigation that lacks appropriate sensitivity to spiritual entities' concerns about privacy and autonomy. We're willing to cooperate with research that treats us as colleagues rather than specimens, states the lead spirit at St. Michael's Point when informed about university interest. But we won't participate in studies that reduce supernatural partnership to mechanical procedures that ignore the personal relationships and mutual respect that make collaboration possible. The spirit's concerns reflect legitimate worries about academic approaches that might systematize partnership methods in ways that eliminate the empathy and individual attention that make supernatural collaboration effective. University research could improve training procedures while destroying the personal connections that enable successful partnerships. The compromise involves selective cooperation with researchers who demonstrate understanding of partnership principles, while maintaining operational security for collaborative arrangements that depend on trust and confidentiality. Academic study focuses on outcomes rather than methods, documenting partnership effectiveness without revealing techniques that could be misused by inappropriate practitioners. Dr. Thornton's research reveals that supernatural partnership applications have achieved results that exceed statistical expectations by margins that suggest systematic rather than accidental improvements. Healthcare facilities report unexplained reduction in patient disturbances and enhanced healing outcomes. Educational institutions show improved learning environments and decreased disciplinary problems. Government buildings experience elimination of productivity issues related to unexplained phenomena. The partnership methods appear to address underlying institutional problems that manifest as supernatural phenomena. Dr. Thornton concludes in her preliminary research report, rather than simply suppressing spiritual manifestations, collaborative approaches resolve the conflicts that create supernatural problems, while improving institutional effectiveness in measurable ways. The research validation provides academic credibility for partnership approaches while maintaining appropriate discretion about specific methods and individual spiritual entities involved in collaborative arrangements. The outcomes speak for themselves without requiring detailed explanation of supernatural communication, techniques, or spiritual entity motivations. International attention follows academic recognition, with government agencies and institutional organizations from other countries requesting consultation services and training programs. The demand exceeds available coordination resources. Despite expansion of training efforts and distribution of responsibilities among multiple qualified practitioners, we're approaching the limits of sustainable expansion. You observe during network planning discussions. The partnership principles work effectively, but they require individual attention and personal development that can't be mass-produced or systematically replicated beyond certain practical limitations. The expansion limitations force recognition that supernatural partnership, while dramatically effective, cannot become universal institutional practice due to resource constraints and individual skill requirements. The approaches work for selected applications where circumstances are appropriate and qualified coordinators are available, but they cannot replace all traditional methods for addressing institutional challenges. The selective application model focuses partnership resources on situations where collaborative approaches offer the greatest advantage over traditional methods, while acknowledging that some institutional problems are better addressed through conventional techniques that don't require supernatural collaboration. 15 years after arriving at St. Michael's Point as a desperate plague refugee seeking isolated employment, you've become the recognized founder of systematic approaches to supernatural partnership that have transformed how institutions address spiritual phenomena throughout the civilized world. But more importantly, you've discovered that the most terrifying job in medieval Europe became the most meaningful work of your lifetime. The lighthouse at St. Michael's Point continues to operate under supernatural partnership arrangements, now managed by a team of trained coordinators who maintain collaborative relationships with spiritual entities while providing navigation guidance that exceeds traditional beacon capabilities. Maritime casualties in the waters around the lighthouse remain virtually unknown, and the installation serves as a training center for partnership development techniques. The spirits who originally opposed lighthouse operations have found peace and purpose through collaborative work that honors their maritime expertise while serving the welfare of living sailors. Their supernatural capabilities continue to enhance navigation safety, but their primary satisfaction comes from constructive partnership, relationships that acknowledge their value and dignity as individuals. We've achieved something that seemed impossible when this partnership began, reflects the lead spirit during one of your visits to the lighthouse. We've proven that the living and the dead can work together for common goals that serve everyone's interests. The collaboration has healed spiritual wounds that had festered for decades, while improving maritime safety beyond what either human or supernatural capabilities could achieve alone. Your personal life has stabilized through marriage. To Margaret Holly, an establishment of a household that accommodates your supernatural sensitivity, while providing normal family relationships. The balance between professional responsibilities and personal welfare that seemed impossible during the intensive coordination period has become sustainable through careful boundary management and shared responsibilities. The partnership work gave my life meaning and purpose that I never could have found in normal employment. You reflect during family conversations about your career, but it also taught me that individual welfare and personal relationships are essential for sustained effectiveness in any professional context. The most important partnerships are those we form with other living people who share our hopes and concerns. The network of institutional partnerships continues to expand under distributed coordination that reduces dependence on any individual, while maintaining collaborative principles that ensure spiritual entities are treated as colleagues rather than resources. Training programs produce qualified practitioners at rates that meet institutional demand without compromising partnership quality or effectiveness. Most importantly, the success of supernatural partnership has demonstrated that phenomena traditionally viewed as problems or threats can become opportunities for institutional improvement when approached with empathy, creativity, and willingness to consider collaborative alternatives to confrontational responses. The lighthouse keeper's job taught me that the most terrifying situations often contain the seeds of the most meaningful solutions. You conclude in your memoir about partnership development. What initially appeared to be supernatural harassment was actually frustrated attempts at communication from spiritual entities who wanted to contribute to maritime safety but lacked appropriate channels for collaborative participation. The broader implications of partnership success extend beyond supernatural applications to encompass any situation where different groups with conflicting interests must find ways to coexist and cooperate. The principles of empathy, communication, and collaborative problem-solving that enabled supernatural partnership apply to human conflicts as well as spiritual ones. Educational institutions use partnership principles to address conflicts between different cultural or economic groups. Government agencies apply collaborative approaches to negotiations between competing political interests. Commercial organizations employ partnership methods for resolving disputes between management and labor representatives. The most important lesson from supernatural partnership you observe during speaking engagements about institutional reform is that seemingly impossible conflicts can be resolved when all parties are willing to acknowledge each other's legitimate concerns and work together toward mutually beneficial solutions. The techniques that enable collaboration between the living and the dead can certainly facilitate cooperation between different groups of living people. As you approach old age, your legacy extends far beyond lighthouse operations to encompass fundamental changes in how institutions address spiritual phenomena and how human organizations approach collaborative problem-solving. The terrifying job that nearly destroyed your sanity became the foundation for institutional reforms that continue to improve lives throughout the civilized world. The lighthouse at St. Michael's Point continues to shine its beacon across the dark waters, but now that light represents more than navigation guidance for passing ships. It symbolizes the possibility of finding common ground between seemingly incompatible forces, the potential for transforming opposition into collaboration, and the enduring hope that empathy and communication can resolve conflicts that appear to be irreconcilable. The flame that you struggled so desperately to maintain during those first terrifying nights has become a beacon of hope that illuminates possibilities for institutional reform, spiritual reconciliation, and human cooperation that extend far beyond the rocky promontory where your journey began. The screaming that once filled your nightmares has been replaced by the voices of countless individuals, both living and dead, who have found meaning and purpose through collaborative partnerships that honor everyone's dignity and contributions. In the end, the most terrifying job in medieval Europe became the most transformative work of your lifetime, proving that sometimes the greatest fears contain the greatest opportunities for those brave enough to face them with open hearts and creative minds. The Lighthouse stands as eternal testimony to the power of collaboration over confrontation, understanding over fear, and hope over despair in the endless human quest for meaning, safety, and connection in a dangerous and mysterious world. And on quiet nights, when the wind dies down and the sea grows calm, you can still hear the spirits singing their ancient songs of the sea, no longer cries of anguish and despair, but harmonies of peace and fulfillment that echo across the waters like prayers of gratitude for the partnerships that transform their eternal rest from torment into the deepest satisfaction of service to those who still sail the dangerous passages between life and death, hope and despair, isolation and community on the endless ocean of human existence. The beacon burns on, tended now by new keepers who understand that the greatest lights are those kindled not in opposition to the darkness, but in collaboration with all the forces, seen and unseen, living and dead, human and supernatural, that share the common goal of guiding travelers safely home through the treacherous waters of existence toward harbors of peace, understanding, and lasting connection that transcend the boundaries between this world and the next.